Block 1. Audiobook title, Ebonheim Odyssey, 01-54, by Zanafar. This work belongs to author, Zanafar. Source, scribblehub.com. Chapter 1, Fake It Till You Make It. 14th Day of Wintergrasp, 1363. I just don't think it's a good idea to fake our own deity, grumbled the man named Sven as he picked his teeth with his crusted fingers while slouching against the back corner of the newly built feast hall. We're not faking a deity, Sven, Engine replied from across the room. Most of the gathered elders huddled around the fire pit to feast on the spit roast boar in the center. Engine continued, we are envisioning our ideal deity to pay homage to precisely because the ones we've worshipped before turned out to be arseholes or deviants that couldn't care less about the plights of those they've marginalized. Sven squinted his eyes at him. I'm 2 mugs deep into this mead brewed by Bogdan here, which, by the way, tastes just as well as the sweat off my old sack, so would you kindly speak like a simple man and not use so much gibberish? Bogdan grunted in protest across from Sven as he downs his own mug of mead, eyes wincing from disgust. Engine sighed, shaking his head. Alright, I'll explain my intent once again so that you can understand clearly. He paced around the hall, passing by each of the 15 elders who attended his summons. In the past 10 months that we've traveled together, worked together, and lived side by side, I realized that we all have 2 things in common. The first is that we have all been wronged, one way or another, by terrible gods. Engine gestured towards 2 elders in tribal garments of earth and tone. The Jixisha tribe were forced to flee after their lands were conquered by a belligerent god of battle that oversees the city of Metosia. They attacked unprovoked, despite the Jixisha keeping to themselves and only wanting peace. What does belligerent mean? Sven asked, overly aggressive. Engine answered as he approached another pair of elders. Bjorn and Thorson here are from a clan that used to serve under Nidar, the city god of Skoravik, but their clan was exiled for speaking out against Nidar's tyranny. Engine motioned towards another elder. Ionis was a former vassal of the god Zamos that oversaw the town of Tomari, until another god usurped control after killing the former. His group was forced to leave their hometown, or else meet the same fate as their fallen deity. Engine looked at each of the gathered elders and noticed that they wore the same somber expressions he had seen when he first met them during the month-long journey to this place. The journey started from his former home city of Mistfell. Other groups hailing from different regions slowly joined his caravan until what was once a small group of 80 people became 700 after arriving at their destination, an ancient valley between the arms of 2 titanic mountain ranges. No expedition has ever taken root there. They were the first. My son, Engine continued, died from a supinal disease at the feet of a god calling himself Zerus. I begged and prayed for my son's salvation because I saw that God perform such divine miracles for others, but he merely stood there with a sneer, stating that I have not contributed enough to his treasury to warrant the use of his divinity, even after I offered everything I owned. The silence from the room was palpable as many recalled their own misfortunes. I apologize for reopening old wounds, Engine said as he poured himself a mug of mead. His recollections and the wretched aftertaste of the mead brought tears to his eyes which he wiped away. Bogdan, you seriously need to reassess your brewing methods. Bogdan joined in with the dry chuckle echoing across the room. But why is there a need to come up with a fake deity for us then? Sven asked. A few others nodded their heads in agreement with him. That goes with the second thing we all have in common, said Engine. We are all good folk. Despite our differences, we have worked hard and helped each other to settle into this foreign land with unknown dangers and tribulations. We have shared our knowledge with each other and partaken on each other's customs and traditions to better know each other as friends and neighbors. He walked towards an open window and looked out at the silhouette of towering trees beyond the recently cultivated fields. But just because we are all good people doesn't mean that we will be safe from harm. His gaze drifted to the campfires of the numerous encampments dotting the open regions of the forest and continued. Everyone knows that a settlement, whether it be a village, town, or city, that is not overseen by a deity is at an extreme disadvantage compared to ones that do have one. He turned towards the others. Gods, for better or worse, are essential to the longevity of nations. By their very existence, they deter most hostile forces bent on acting within their domain. Engine walked back to his original spot at the fire pit and sat down. Alas, He continued, "We don't have a deity watching over this region, and I don't think any of us would accept some god that may wander here and claim this settlement as their own." The other elders collectively nod in agreement. Engine nodded in turn. "My proposal to invent our own deity has two objectives. First, it will serve as a bridge to unite our various cultures and heal the past traumas associated with gods. Many of us have been raised to honor the divine, and I believe faith can still be a positive force. Instead of discarding it, we can develop a new faith that is tailored to our needs." Some might label this idea as delusional, but if it provides us with comfort and fosters harmony, then there's no harm in pursuing it. Engine stopped speaking, letting the others speak amongst themselves for some time before continuing. "The second purpose is to deceive any potential outsiders who would fancy causing trouble for us. If we are convinced enough of our belief, then they will believe that a deity watches over us as well. No one sane would risk the eye of the divine even if they haven't witnessed its physical manifestation." "This seems like a lot of effort for what may all just be lip service in the end," said Bjorn with a gruff tone. His boulder of a frame loomed over the others. Despite his advanced age, he still carried an imposing demeanor. "Aye, that may be so," said Engine. "This will only work if we fully believe in it with our heart of hearts. We must put in the effort, in order to deceive ourselves and our past trauma so that we can look towards our future with dignity and pride." Engine ended his speech with a raised fist. The silence returned as the elders pondered about what to decide. Hilda, the druid from the Jixisha tribe as well as the eldest of those gathered, sipped her tea without uttering a single word throughout the debate. She felt Engine's sincerity in his appeal and his wisdom in his approach, but she also saw the 3 mugs of mead he drank beforehand. She also smelled the distinct aroma of cannabis that permeated from his being, no doubt lingering after he partook in smoking that substance with a few others earlier in the gathering. Most of the others present were in a similar state. She was satisfied with the pleasant company, so only sought nourishment from small morsels of boar meat and her blend of tea. "I think it's a worthwhile venture to try," said Hilda. She thought that Engine's idea, while influenced by beverage and substance, would not cause harm to others. It may just be a way to cope with everyone's worries and uneasiness living in the frontiers without the influence of a divine. Her tribe had no need for reverence for such beings, but perhaps this was worth going along with. If after some time people stop believing in this non-existent deity and eventually forget the original purpose for it all is, then we can reconvene and see if it accomplished its purpose. The others looked at her and thought of her words. None were completely against the idea, but only strained to justify the effort. Engine spoke up. "So let's decide on a vote. All those in favor raise your mugs." The votes were unanimous. All mugs and a single teacup rose. Engine smiled with pride and nodded. "Now comes the next part of the discussion. What would our deity be like?" "I have an idea. A wise, merciful, and dashing god," shouted Dionysus, albeit heavily influenced by his past admiration of Zemos. "A bold, strong oxen of a god," said Thorson. "I want our god to have a long white beard to show his wisdom," said one elder. "A god with 4 arms would be kind of nice," said another. "How about 4 legs? 2 heads? A god in the form of a tree would be fitting." "Why does it have to be a god? I'd rather worship a goddess." Here. "Can the goddess have big bosoms?" asked Thorson. "You're onto something there, brother," said Bjorn as he clasped hands with Thorson. "Men, they only want one thing, and it's, does anyone want the boar's tongue?" Hours passed. Each popular idea was carefully deliberated and voted on. No aspect of their deity was defined until the votes were unanimous. The mead ran low from the effort. "All right," said Engine while slouched against the wall, massaging his temples. "Here's what's been voted on so far. We have decided on a goddess, whose visage is that of an innocent young girl, whose flesh is that of the earth, whose hair flows like water, whose eyes are brilliant like the sun, and who is garbed in a blanket of clouds." The other elders raised their mugs in agreement. "Good," Engine continued. "Now we all agreed to our goddess virtues. She is to be kind, affectionate, wise, lovely, and bold when the need rises." The elders raised their mugs once more. "Then lastly, before we adjourn this meeting and retreat to the peace of slumber, which I know many of you are already feeling, we must decide on her name." Iris, Alexandra, Celine, Lorelei, Xena. "It's a little late to ask, but have we decided on a name for our village yet?" asked Brudnik as he raised his hand. The youngest of the elders, having only lived for 41 years, He hadn't spoken much, but this question had always bothered him. The others gave Prudnik blank stares in return, realizing that despite already living in this valley for over a year and even managing to erect several buildings, no one has thought of a name for the village yet. No one brought it up until now. How? Another hour passed. Many became weary, but another unanimous vote passed. Then it is settled, said Engine. This village will hereby be called Ebonheim, in honor of the ancient ebon trees in the forest that resists even the sharpest of axes. The name will be a symbol for the resilience of its people in the face of adversity as its longevity. A round of applause filled the room. Lastly, once again, we now just have to come up with and vote for the name of our goddess, said Engine with a heavy sigh. The others groaned. After another bout of silence, someone mumbled a response. How about we just call her Ebonheim? What? You mean the name of our goddess will be the same name as our village? That sounds strange. Won't it get confusing? I think it makes things easier. Fewer names to remember. It's not like this goddess will take offense to it. She's just made up, after all. Read. Not wrong. Does anyone else have another hour or two to spare to debate on her name? Engine raised his mug. Then it's settled. Our goddess will be named Ebonheim, in honor of our village of Ebonheim. That our goddess and village are one in the same. Both serve its people and are part of us. They all raised their mugs while collectively yawning. Good work everyone, said Engine as he slowly headed out the main door. Remember to spread the word of what we discussed here, and with that I bid you all a good night. Akashic system initialized. Law of plausibility activated. Constraints of causality activated. Domain administrator request initiated. Accepted. Beginning accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 1%. 2 months later. What started as a cute lip service to appease the village elders' seemingly whimsical decision to revere a non-existent deity became a trend that took root in the hearts and minds of the villagers. The delusion became activities of endearment, especially to the younger generation of the community. Goddess Ebonheim, said a young man tending to his garden, if you can bless my tomatoes so that they turn out plump and juicy, I'd appreciate it. The goddess would say to you that you should be diligent in tending to those weeds if you want your tomatoes to grow, said the neighbor living in a tent from across the way. Thank you much, goddess be praised, goddess be praised indeed. They chuckled at each other. Accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 12%. 6 months later, the village held a small festival, celebrating the completion of a tannery, an apothecary, another cistern, a decent autumn harvest, and the safe birth of several newborns in the past year. Many danced around the wooden effigy of Ebonheim atop a small shrine consisting of a miniature garden atop a pile of large flat stones found at a nearby riverbed, and decorated by Jixishan trinkets. The celebration lasted throughout the night, with many paying homage at the shrine after congratulating each other for another year of hard work paying off. Accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 33%. 1 year later, accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 65%. Another year followed. Accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 99%. Accumulation of requisite quintessence for divine creation. Status 100%. Requisite quintessence for divine creation acquired. Initiating creation process. Inputting requested parameters. Process complete. Loading. Divine creation complete. Vivid colors permeated through the darkness, first as blobs splattering around the canvas of pitch black void. The blob slowly flowed into discernible shapes with clear boundaries that contained its corresponding colors. A tapestry of green atop a trunk of browns and grays signified the trees, while the canvas of blue with streaks of white illuminated the sky. Sounds of the earth shifting, the leaves blowing, and the animals roaming assailed her senses. Her vision shifted around to scan her environment. Everything seemed so new, yet so nostalgic. She sensed herself, a floating, disembodied mote of essence. A string of words revealed itself in her vision, manifesting as glowing text in a language she inherently understood. Name, Ebonheim. Divinity type, terrestrial god, artificial. Divine rank, lesser god, dawn stage. Quintessence, 717, 8000. The mote of essence known as Ebonheim found herself uttering her first word. A30. Chapter 2, What's Fake is Real. and what's real is fake. 8th day of high glow, 1366. Ebonheim spent the morning flying around the forest as a fuzzy ball of light, invisible and intangible to those that dwelled in the material realm. The sun rose above the trees, casting a pale light over the landscape. The birds began to stir, and the forest gradually came to life. She came across a small stream. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and as she drew closer, she saw a large fish swimming in the stream. The fish swam by a small outcropping of rock where a wildflower grew. Ebonheim watched the fish for a time, fascinated by its movement. Everything she saw and heard seemed so pretty and wonderful. There were still so many things to experience, but before she got too distracted, she turned her attention back to the village and flew there. The village nestled itself within the thick forest, comprising many clusters of simple thatched roof cottages connected by dirt trails that wove between the trees. Pockets of clearings dotted the land, which the villagers turned into gardens and fields for cultivation. A pair of tributaries snaked through its western and southern quadrant before converging into the larger river to the south. As she floated over the village, she noticed something. A small group of children gathered around a tall, lanky man, who was telling them stories in a dramatic way, his hands flailing about as if he was living the story himself. She watched as the children listened with rapt attention, their eyes wide with wonder. The man's story seemed to transport the children to a different world, one filled with adventure and excitement. Ebonheim felt a surge of delight and wondered if she could weave a story like that herself, something that could captivate the hearts and minds of the villagers. She made a mental note to try that sometime. Further on, Ebonheim saw a group of women sitting in a clearing, spinning wool from the sheep that grazed in the nearby meadow. They chatted and laughed as they worked, their fingers expertly guiding the spindle and distaff. Ebonheim couldn't help but feel impressed by their skill, and made another mental note to learn how to spin herself one day. In another part of the village, a man was hammering away at a piece of metal, sparks flying in all directions. His workshop was cluttered with all sorts of tools, each one looking more complicated than the last. At the center of the village resided the feast hall, an imposing structure built of gray stone and thick lumber. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, the roof was steeply pitched, made of thatch, and adorned with a chimney that gave off a steady stream of smoke. The scent of roasting meats and spices wafted through the air. It didn't take long for her to see that the village was more than just a collection of houses and farms. It was a living, breathing organism, with each person playing their unique role in its continued existence. She marveled at how the villagers were able to carve out a life for themselves in the midst of such a wild and untamed forest, using the resources around them to build a thriving community. What a lively bunch! The smiles on their faces filled her puffy, glowing form with happiness. The Akashic System's glowing text reappeared in her view. 5 attribute points need allocation. Choose 6 starting abilities. HMPH. These messages were an annoying distraction. She willed them away once more, but knew they would return to her view sometime later. Right now, she had many more important things to think about. She flew away from the village and headed back into the forest. As Ebonheim made her way deeper into the seclusion of the forest, she found herself surrounded by a grove of dark towering trees. Their gnarled roots jutted out from the ground, twisting and coiling like a writhing serpent. The trunks of the trees were massive, with thick, gnarled bark that seemed to have been carved by the winds and the elements over the centuries. She continued to float around them and noticed something odd. One of the trees, a massive oak with twisted branches, was glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She floated closer, her curiosity piqued, and saw that the tree was covered in a blanket of lichen that shone like thousands of tiny stars. As she floated on, she came across a small clearing, its edges defined by fallen trees that lay scattered about like discarded toys. In the center of the clearing was a small pool, its surface as still and reflective as a sheet of glass. She watched as a pair of dragonflies flitted about, their iridescent wings shimmering in the dappled sunlight. While wandering, she stumbled upon a thicket of briar and some fallen trees that formed a natural barrier. Ebonheim's intangible form floated through the dense thicket, its thorny tendrils reaching out as if to snag her, but passing harmlessly through her. This seemed like a cozy, secluded space to think. However, after meandering around the thicket for a while, She realized that she was no closer to finding a solution. Should she just casually walk into town and announce her presence? Should she produce some omens of her arrival? What do I do? They can't even see me or hear me. Suddenly, those annoying messages popped up again, interrupting her thoughts. Shut up. I'm having an existential crisis right now, and I just existed not too long ago. Damn it, there's got to be a way for them to notice. Divine ability, manifestation, rank I. Effect, materializes a physical form until the form is destroyed. Cost, 60 essence. I could do something like that already? Wait. How much essence do I have? Essence, 180. Manifest. She channeled her essence and the glowing mote that was her form pulsed and expanded until shattering into fragments of light that revealed a young human girl standing in her place. Essence, 180, greater than 120. Ebonheim opened her eyes, then blinked, and immediately became amazed at blinking. Whoa! She shouted, then gasped, covering her mouth. She sounded a little different compared to her incorporeal form, but it still sounded nice nonetheless. Ebonheim extended her arms and marveled at the way her fingers moved, bending and flexing with ease. She ran her fingers through her long hair, feeling its silkiness as it slipped through her fingers. Ebonheim took a step forward and felt the soft grass beneath her feet. She giggled as she wiggled her toes in the lush blades, feeling their coolness on her skin. She had seen the world before, but it had never been like this. Everything was so vivid and real, and she reveled in the sensations. Her hands and fingers looked great, her feet and toes, exquisite. Her white dress, she had a dress? She pinched and stretched the fabric and felt its softness. She sniffed and savored the scent of it. She spun around, feeling the fabric of her dress billow around her. It was so light and airy, and she loved how it moved with her. As she twirled, she noticed the way the sun glinted off the threads of her dress, making it shimmer in the light. As she continued to explore her physical form, Ebonheim realized that she was hearing things differently too. The sounds of the world around her were clearer and more defined. She heard the rustling of the leaves in the trees, the chirping of the birds, and the distant murmur of a river. It was like a symphony to her ears, and she reveled in the richness of the sounds. Finally, Ebonheim looked up at the sky through the forest canopy, marveling at the shapes of the clouds. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the chance to experience the world in this way. As she stood there, taking it all in, she knew that she would never forget this moment, the moment when she first stepped into her physical form and truly felt alive. She placed her hands on her hips and smiled to herself, as expected of a goddess. There's nothing I can't do. As she admired her new form, she realized that she had made up her mind. She settled on a simple plan. All she had to do was materialize herself in all of her glory to her beloved villagers after they prayed to her. Easy. They'll be so amazed. She scanned the area for an exit through the briar. None. She trapped herself. Ebonheim frowned. HMPH. You think some bush can trap a goddess? Think again. She tried burrowing through a slight opening but was met with sharp thorns and jagged branches that pricked at her skin and tore through her dress. She winced at the pain but refused to let it deter her. She tried pressing on but was met with further resistance. Ow, ow, ow. She recoiled back to her starting point, falling on the ground. Ow. Health, 180, greater than 179. So this was what pain felt like. It wasn't pleasant, not at all. She winced as she stood to brush off the leaves and dirt that clung onto her. Never had she felt so much shame, being trapped by mere bushes, but also because this was the first time she felt shame. Let's not repeat this. But now she was in her second predicament. How can she escape? Could she dematerialize? Divine ability, demanifestation, rank I. Effect, dematerializes physical form. Cost, 30 essence. It costs essence to dematerialize too? That's a scam. She buried her face in her hands and groaned. I still have to do it. Poof! Her physical form shattered into particles of essence, and only a single ephemeral mote of light remained that quickly darted back to the village. Essence, 120. Greater than 90. The best place to announce her presence would have to be by her little shrine near the center of the village, just between the feast hall and the commons. Ebonheim made her way there and saw a dozen villagers gathered, their voices carrying through the air as they discussed which crops had the best yield, how to prepare the hunted game, or how low rainfall had been compared to last year. An elderly man tended to her shrine with care, His hair was combed to the side and his mustache was thin and grey. She hovered above him and watched. He polished her wooden effigy that was worn down from being outside and set it back on top of the miniature garden. "You are looking majestic today as well, O great goddess," said the old man. "I pray for Ebonheim's continued prosperity and her people's happiness." He bowed his head at the effigy. 2 quintessence acquired. Quintessence 717 thousandths, greater than 719 thousandths. Or, what a kind prayer. If a mote of light could smile, it would look like her right about now. This was the perfect time to reveal herself, right? Surely this merited her presence. It had to be now. But what would she say to him? Ebonheim orbited around the unsuspecting old man's head as she pondered. An idea formed in her mind. Manifest essence, 90. Greater than 30. The old man gasped and covered his eyes as a blinding flash of multicolored light erupted into existence in front of him, accompanied by a strong gust of wind that toppled over the trinkets and effigy atop the shrine. Ebonheim's physical form slowly came to view as she descended to the ground beside him. She opened her eyes slowly and smiled as she spoke. "Your earnest prayers have reached me. This day, I will bestow upon you a gift for your sincerity. May you live long and prosper." Eowag! The old man screamed as he stared at her wide-eyed with bewilderment. He then wobbled and fell on his back, one hand clutching his chest while the other reaching out at the sky. "Ah!" It was Ebonheim's turn to scream. What happened? The small crowd around the area also took notice and began screaming and yelling. Some ran away in an absolute panic while others remained, looking horrified at the sight of a girl standing over a fallen old man who was gasping for air. A young man tried to approach but backed away instead. "Something is wrong with old man Oil's heart. He's dying." A middle-aged woman pointed at Ebonheim. "That girl put a curse on him." Ebonheim shook her head vigorously. "I didn't do it. It wasn't me." "Someone call the elders, call Bjorn or Thorson or one of their sons," a woman from further back shouted. One man ran towards the feast hall. Ebonheim looked back down at Doyle, mouth agape and eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. "What do I do? What do I do?" There was definitely something she could do. She was a goddess. Healing her devotees should be innate to her. But what were her powers again? Choose 6 starting abilities. What? She didn't have one by default? She still had to choose? Arg, fine. I need healing. Divine ability, self-regeneration, rank I. Effect: regenerates health at a rate of 20 per minute. Duration: 5 minutes. Range: self. Cost: 15 essence. Not for me. For Doyle. Hurry. He's foaming at the mouth. Divine ability, ailment cleansing pulse, rank I. Effect: restores 15 health to the target immediately. Every 12 seconds, the target can make a successful recovery from a non-supernatural disease by making an endurance check versus the disease's severity. This ability gives a +8 bonus to the target's endurance for the check. Duration: 1 minute. Range: touch. Cost: 20 essence. Yes, this one. I'll pick this one. Hurry so I can heal him. Divine ability, ailment cleansing pulse, rank I. Acquired. Choose 5 starting abilities. Later, this is more important. Ebonheim kneeled beside Doyle and placed her hands on his chest. She focused her thoughts into healing him. Her hands emitted a vibrant green light as she poured her essence into Doyle. Divine ability, ailment cleansing pulse, rank I. Activated. Essence: 30, greater than 10. Doyle seemed to breathe easier. The pained look on his face softened. A faint green aura surrounded his chest. The aura burst away then reformed back in intervals. "Come on, Doyle. You can do this. You still have many years ahead of you." "I don't want my first act as a goddess to be murder." A minute later, her power faded. Doyle lay there, eyes closed but with a content expression. His chest rose and fell. Ebonheim fell on her butt and gave a big sigh of relief. This was a disaster, but at least the crisis was averted. She needed a new plan to save face in front of the remaining gathered. They continued to look at her with shock and wariness. She was cut short by a large shadow that suddenly loomed over her from behind. She arched her head back to look, only to be greeted by a meaty hand grabbing her head, lifting her off the ground, and suspending her in midair. "Who are you and what did you do to Doyle?" Ebonheim knew that this towering man's gruff tone belonged to Thorson. He twisted his hand to turn her around to face him, still maintaining his tight grip. She could only muster an awkward grin. I''. Ebonheim. I just cured Oil of his ailment. Nice to meet you. Thorsten's grip tightened as the veins in his neck and forehead bulged. Ebonheim winced. Her grin contorted into a panicked look. Ow. Sir, violence isn't the answer. Ow. Your jest does not amuse me, young one. I don't know if you're some feral child or an evil spirit, but you've just landed yourself in jail for your crimes. 24. Chapter 3, Captured, Goddess vs. Elders. Ebonheim rattled the bars of the wooden cage Thorsten threw her into after he carried her inside the feast hall. The cage was only big enough to house something the size of a full-grown wild boar, so at most she could sit on her knees or butt. I'm telling you the truth, I am Ebonheim, she said towards Thorsten, who was stoking the fire pit near the center of the feast hall. Quiet, he replied. Once the others arrive, then we'll decide on your fate. And don't even try to use any of your magic while I'm around. I'm a good thrower of my axe and don't think I won't use it on you just because you look like a child. Ebonheim sat cross-legged in front of him, fuming at his words, trying to ignore the cold chill creeping through her bones from being held captive in the small cage. Are you always this mean to people you've only just met? She asked. She tried to be as polite as possible given the situation, but he still wouldn't stop scowling. Only to those who cause the village trouble, he replied without looking up from what he was doing. He kept piling more wood into the fire pit. I'm not causing anyone trouble. If anything, all I want to do is help the village. You're a stranger, and strangers come with danger. Look what you did to poor old Doyle. You bewitched him with your words and looks until his heart couldn't take it. Just because the man has been alone for all his life doesn't give you the right to break his spirit. Ebonheim made a disgusted face at him. That's a terrible thing to say about Doyle. He'll cry if he heard you say that. And I didn't bewitch him. You cursed him then. For what reason? Does an evil, unscrupulous, witch child need a reason? He replied sarcastically. Then he finally turned around towards her and spoke out loud again. Just keep still until the others arrive. Ugh, can you at least put me in a bigger cage? It's dirty in here. Then maybe we'll have you clean the cage as punishment while you stay locked up until we decide your fate. Ebonheim folded her arms across her chest and pursed her lips together to keep from saying something she would regret later. She bumped her head against the bars of the cage and let out a sigh. It seemed like there was no convincing him, but maybe when the others arrived she'll fare better. As she waited, she took a good look at the room and Thorsten. The room was filled with the warm glow of the central hearth surrounded by 4 long wooden tables. The arched roof, with its rafters and pillars, made the room look like the hull of a longship that was toppled over. Thorsten was covered in leather and hide, much like many of the villagers she saw earlier. He was built like a solid wall, with arms thicker than her legs and legs probably heavier than her entire body. His rust-colored hair was braided and tied to a low ponytail while his disheveled beard spilled down to his belly without care. The main door swung open as a middle-aged man with a scholarly air about him entered. He had a sharp jawline, a straight nose, and deep-set brown eyes that seemed to hold a wealth of knowledge. His hair was a mess of dark curls that cascaded down his shoulders, framing his face. He wore a simple woolen cloak over a tunic and trousers, the mark of a man who valued comfort over fashion. Ebonheim knew her potential savior to be none other than Engine, the genius prophet who heralded the idea of her existence, the muse who inspired her majesty, the poet who sparked her identity, the philosopher who shaped her ideals, the scholar who deciphered her mysteries, the entrepreneur who recognized her value. There, Thorsten, what's all this I hear about some Oil almost dying and you catching a spirit? Engine asked. Engine, I'm glad you're here, Ebonheim said as she rattled her cage. Thorsten didn't believe me that I'm Ebonheim. He was so mean to me. I think I still have dents on my head from him grabbing me and carrying me here. He put me in this cage. This is undignified. This cage hasn't even been cleaned all that recently. It still smells like vomit, dung, and regret. I need you to convince him to treat me properly, and I already apologized for what happened to Doyle earlier. It was an accident, but I healed him. He's better now. I think I fixed what was wrong with his back too. So tell him. Engine stood by, mouth agape, and stared at her with an incredulous look for an awkward amount of time before turning towards Thorsten. What's with this sassy, caged child? Engine asked while violently wagging a finger toward Ebonheim. Thorsten walked over to Engine and glared at Ebonheim's way before speaking back to Engine. From what I heard, she suddenly appeared before Doyle while he was at the shrine and caused his heart to almost burst. And just as you've heard, She's spouting nonsense about being Ebonheim. I told you, I didn't do that to him, Ebonheim said. Engine motioned Thorsten to follow him across the room further away from her. Did you see it happen? Engine asked. Thorsten shook his head. Not at first, but I did come out in time to see her using some magic over Doyle while he was lying on the ground. What happened afterward? He looked stable and fell asleep. After I told one of the men there to summon you, I had the others tend to him while I put the child in the cage. Engine looked back over at the young girl. She seemed to exude an otherworldly aura. Her olive skin reminded him of people from the Jixisha tribe. But all of the druids who could use their magic left for an expedition and weren't due back for another few days. However, she was distinctly different from anyone he has ever come across. He marveled at her hair, a cascade of iridescent azure that shimmered and danced like the waves of a restless sea. Her tresses framed her face, accentuating her eyes, which were a striking gold that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The girl's lithe form was veiled in an intricate white dress that seemed to defy the gloom around her. The fabric was pristine, as if untouched by the dirt and grime of her captivity. The detached sleeves that adorned her arms were an elegant touch, giving her an ethereal quality that only added to her mystique. Whoever she was, she did not seem like a child from the village. He looked back at Thorsten and furrowed his brow. So, you think that she's some spirit in human flesh? Thorsten leaned closer. Or some feral child, but I think she might be some sort of spiritual being. Oh, maybe an abyssal being from the way she's acting over there, rattling that cage like some wild animal. Has she done anything else suspicious while in the cage? Engine asked. No. Aside from blabbering about being Ebonheim, nothing. I don't know why she keeps insisting on her story since. You know? Thorsten shifted his eyes around him before leaning even closer to whisper into Engine's ear. Ebonheim doesn't really exist. Both men heard the caged girl groan from across the room. Engine rubbed his chin as he pondered. If she really was some spirit or abyssal entity, she would have known of the farce and would know that trying to impersonate Ebonheim wouldn't work. Unless she knew that we'd know that she'd know so. Engine saw Thorsten's eyes dart around as if trying to finish his line of thought but failing miserably. So? Engine asked. Thorsten shrugged. I don't know where I was going with it. Sorry, but I doubt she's powerful since she hasn't escaped or killed me for locking her up. Is there any way to find out what she really is and why she's here? Engine shook his head. Hilda and her group of druids aren't back yet, so I don't think there's anyone in the village with powers to discern this one's true nature. But Ebonheim saw the two men walk back towards her, stopping just outside her cage. She gave the biggest pout she could muster. Somehow, she sensed that they were speaking bad about her in their corner. Gut feeling. You don't believe me, don't you? She asked. Look, Engine said. You seem like a fine lass, but we don't know who you are. However, what we do know is that you are most certainly not someone from this village. So, you could either be a child of someone from outside the village who can do a bit of magic, or you are a spirit that took on a human form. You then insist on being our goddess, which I am certain is not the case. Therefore, for your well-being, I would advise you to stop saying that or else be smote by the celestial realm for impersonating the divine. Thorsten tapped Engine on his shoulder. Engine, you're speaking in such a superfluous way as you usually do. But you're speaking with a young one. Speak simply. Engine tilted his head at Thorsten. I taught you that word, superfluous, you know. Thorsten looked over at her. What he meant to say was, don't lie about being a goddess. We know it ain't the truth. I'm not impersonating. I am Ebonheim. Thorsten crossed his arms in front of him. Prove it. How? She asked. Tell us something only Ebonheim would know, or show us something only a goddess can do. Engine answered. It was Ebonheim's turn to cross her arms in front of her. She had to come up with something convincing to get out of this predicament. What else could she do anyways? She needed something flashy and grand to shut their mouths and prostrate themselves in front of her for treating her like unwanted garbage. Listing all activatable abilities: Divine Sight, Rank I, Manifestation, Rank I, Demanifest, Ailment Cleansing Pulse, Rank I. Doesn't seem like any of those are flashy. She couldn't even use most of them because she didn't have enough essence. She hasn't used Divine Sight yet though. What could it do? Divine Ability, Divine Sight, Rank I. Effect. Reveals the aura of the target. Concentrating on one target will reveal its basic information. If the target is one of your followers, more information can be revealed. Duration, 1 hour. Cost, 5 essence. That's not flashy, but it could be something, so she focused her thoughts on activating it. Essence 10, greater than 5. Her eyes gave off a faint glow. Both men took a step back. She saw that both men were enveloped in a translucent blue aura. She focused her attention on Thorson. Name, Thorson Gustafsson. Age, 38. Date of birth, 5th day of Rain Crown. Devotion rank, follower. Status, healthy. Ebonheim blinked. It didn't really show much, but she was more curious about what the devotion rank was about. Devotion rank displayed in order from lowest to highest: unbeliever, follower, believer, worshipper, devotee, faithful, disciple, devout, zealot. An increase in devotion rank will increase the quintessence gained from that individual. TSK. Thorson was only at that point. He still had so much more to improve on. Fortunately for him, she was there to help. Ebonheim pointed at Thorson and grinned. Your name is Thorson Gustafsson. You are still living at the prime of your life at 38 years of age. You were born on the 5th day of Rain Crown. Thorson's eyes widened, then he looked at Engine alarmed. She knows. Only my family knows that about me. Ebonheim looked at Engine and focused her divine sight. Name, Engine Merrick. Age, 48. Date of birth, 20th day of Lustertide. Devotion rank, follower. Status, healthy. Only at that rank? For someone who was instrumental in her existence, only that? Disappointing. She gave Engine a disapproving look before speaking in a monotone voice. Your name is Engine Merrick. You were born on the 20th day of Lustertide. You are 50 years of age and people make fun of your eyebrows behind your back. She lied about the last part though. Engine looked at Thorson. What? You did? Thorson shook his head. I never did. I swear it. Maybe Bjorn did once or twice, but not me. Ebonheim giggled. Engine grumbled under his breath. Alright. That's clever, but I'm not too impressed. What else can you do? Ebonheim blinked once more. Eh? What else can I do? She glanced above her. Maybe she could pick one that only cost 5 essence. Choose 5 starting abilities. Searching for abilities with an essence cost of 5 or under. Only one eligible ability found. Divine ability. Divine cantrip. Effect. You harness a small amount of divine essence to create one of the following effects. Create a harmless sensory effect. Make a small object move or levitate. Clean a small object or surface. Light a small torch or candle. Make a small plant grow or wilt. Range, 10 meters. Duration, instantaneous or 1 hour, depending on effect. Cost, 5 essence. You're kidding me, she said out loud. She doubted that they'd be impressed by any of that. She really needed to take time and look through all her ability options later. This was ridiculous. Why was every ability she could use so expensive? Or rather, why was her essence so low to begin with? Maybe. What? Engine asked. Nothing. I was talking to myself. She thought hard for a minute, but couldn't come up with anything. So, what's going to happen if I can't show any other proof? Thorson patted Engine's shoulder and grinned as he made a subtle wink at him. Then we're going to cook you and feed you to the other elders when they get here. That's what we do to wicked spirits and liars around these parts. Engine crossed his arms and nodded. They'll arrive any moment now. Ebonheim covered her mouth as she gasped. Wait, what? Since when did the villagers practice cannibalism? But she wasn't human. This was just her manifested form. But was she really human in this form? Would she taste like one? What would happen if she was killed and eaten in this form? Many more questions floated in her head as she started to drift into another existential crisis. She wasn't sure if she believed their threat or not, but sticking around to find out wasn't sounding too appealing with every passing breath. She needed a strategic retreat, and there was only one plan she had in mind. Actually, I do have one more ability I can show, but it's a little cramped in here, so it'd be better if I can show you outside this cage. So, can you let me out for a little bit? Ebonheim batted her eyes at them like a puppy wanting to play outside. Both men looked at each other. Thorson shrugged and opened the cage door. She's done nothing dangerous so far. She could have caused our hearts to burst, but maybe she doesn't have enough power for another attempt. What else can she possibly do now? Ebonheim crawled out of the cage, then stood up, giving Thorson a somewhat stern look. This big oaf still suspected her of foul play, yet was sharp enough to notice her lack of power. All right, she said. I need a little more space before I can show you. She gestured for the two men to back away. Both men took a few more steps back and watched her intently. Ebonheim closed her eyes and took a deep breath and lunged forward. hurling towards the open window. Her body twisted and turned with fluid grace, tucking and rolling through the small opening before landing on her feet with a graceful flourish before continuing to sprinting away without breaking stride. She heard Engine and Thorson shouting behind her as they scrambled through the door to give chase. A small group of men were walking towards the feast hall from the clearing in front of her. Despite their first encounter, she instinctively knew them to be some of the other elders in the village's council. As she passed by and saw their quizzical expressions, she smiled and waved at them before turning towards the nearest boundary to the forest. She heard Engine bark orders of pursuit. The rest of the elders joined in the chase. She leapt over fallen logs, ducked under low-hanging branches, and moved across the undergrowth without any impediment. The sound of her pursuers' footsteps echoed through the trees, growing fainter with each passing moment. Ebonheim stuck her tongue out as she continued her escape. You're 100 years too early to catch me. Well, she was caught earlier, but that was honestly a fluke in her eyes. She was ambushed at the time. A short while later, collapsed against a towering tree, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Her muscles were burning with fatigue, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slouched against it, panting heavily, beads of sweat trickling down her brow. Did everyone become exhausted this easily? It didn't seem that long since she escaped from them. She eventually laid down and stared up at the forest canopy in a daze. Her first appearance was a disaster. Maybe she was a little careless in her approach and should have planned things out better. One thing she realized for sure was that she needed to understand more about herself and how being a goddess worked. Her stomach let out a pitiful grumble. 21. Chapter 4. Goddess 101. Ebonheim nibbled on an assortment of berries she scavenged around the forest, thimbleberries, raspberries, juniper berries, and huckleberries. She closed her eyes and savored the explosion of flavors in her mouth as she chewed on the sweet, juicy huckleberry. The tangy notes of the berry provided a refreshing contrast to the sweetness, creating a symphony of flavors that danced on her tongue. She reached for another berry, this time a plum raspberry. She admired the vibrant red color of the fruit and took a deep breath before taking a bite. The raspberry had a soft and delicate texture, unlike the slightly firmer huckleberry. She relished in the contrast of the two flavors, enjoying the unique taste of each berry. She couldn't help but let out a contented sigh as she reached for another berry, feeling grateful for this moment of peace and tranquility that almost made her forget the tribulations she endured earlier. Almost. The image of Engine and Thorson chasing after her still lingered in her mind. They may have won the battle and caused her to retreat, but she wouldn't give up that easily. That's right. She was ill-prepared in that entire ordeal, but that was all about to change. She stared in front of her, focusing her gaze on nothing in particular. 5 attribute points need allocation. Choose 5 starting abilities. The glowing, translucent interface appeared before her eyes, hanging in the air like an ethereal mist. Knowing what something was, yet not knowing much about it, was not a new experience for her despite having only recently awakened. The very moment she became aware of herself and her surroundings, she always felt that she knew a little bit of everything that she encountered even though it was her first time experiencing them. She knew what the sky was, what a tree was, what animals were, and even knew the names and faces of all the people she saw in the village. But she didn't know a great deal about any one thing, the Akashic system. She felt sure that it was instrumental to her birth and her role as a deity. The times that she has interacted with it, it felt like calling upon something outside of herself while also dredging into the deep recesses of her mind. Whatever the sensation, she could manifest it through her will and it reacts accordingly. Maybe it was how gods and goddesses manage their powers and domain. Alright, let's get started then. She spoke aloud to no one in particular. Show me my attributes. Attributes are only applicable while in manifested form. Attributes: Intelligence: 16, Perception: 23, Resilience: 20, Strength: 12, Agility: 26, Endurance: 16, Charisma: 27, Manipulation: 10, Wit: 13. Her intuition had a rough understanding of what those attributes said about her, but she had nothing to compare herself with. What would a normal human's attributes be? Average attribute for a human is 16. 16? She blinked and looked at her attributes again. So she was as smart as an average human, quite a bit better at perceiving things, is more resilient, weaker than average, quite a bit more nimble, average in endurance, a lot more charismatic, which was natural, being a goddess and all. But somehow it didn't help at all dealing with Engine and Thorson. Was this system lying to her? She probably couldn't manipulate a child into giving her head pats. Lastly, below average wit. Am I a plebeian goddess? She groaned and fell back, the remaining bundle of berries rolling off her lap. The screen lingered in front of her as she covered her face in shame. I don't think I'd like the answer, but what's the best attribute a human can have? Maximum attribute for a human is 32. She groaned again, stomping her heels on the soft dirt beneath her. I'm not even better than the best a human can be at any one attribute. But if she put her 5 attribute points into her charisma, then she'd be on par with the most charismatic human. Or maybe she could put it all into strength so she could be average. Or maybe she could be smarter, or wittier, or... After a short time passed, she popped another berry into her mouth. Calm down, Ebonheim. Don't be rash again. The sun is still up, and you're in a safe spot that they haven't been to yet. Take your time. She nodded to herself. Before she could decide on what attribute to put her points into, she needed to know a little bit more about other things. I want to know about my health and essence. Health, 180. Passive health restoration, 9 per hour. Endurance and resilience correlate to health. Essence, 180. Passive essence restoration, 9 per hour. Intelligence and resilience correlate to essence. She pondered for a bit. Alright, let's try adding a point to my resilience. She focused her will on feeling more stubborn and unyielding. 1 point allocated to resilience. Resilience, 20, greater than 21. Health, 185. Essence, 185. Passive restoration unchanged. She furrowed her brow. It hasn't really changed much. She had 4 points left. She could put it all in resilience, but maybe she'd be better off fixing her shortcomings. She focused inwardly again. Intelligence: 16, greater than 17. Endurance: 16, greater than 17. Wits: 13, greater than 14. Charisma: 27, greater than 28. Health: 190. Essence: 190. Passive restoration unchanged. Well, the last attribute wasn't really a shortcoming, but who could say no to being more charismatic? She needed every bit of it to deal with the elders anyways. She didn't feel any different. Maybe it was because it didn't increase by much. At least now she knew where she stood compared to humans. Is there a way for me to see the attributes of humans? Divine ability, divine sight, rank 2. Effect: reveals the aura of the target. Concentrating on one target will reveal its basic information and attribute distribution. If the target is one of your followers, more information can be revealed. Duration: 1 hour. Cost: 5 essence. It's at rank 1 right now. How can I increase it? 50 quintessence cost to increase from rank I to rank 2. Current quintessence, 798 thousandths. Quintessence. Out of all the things she inherently knew about, this one was the most intimate to her. Quintessence was prayer and faith manifest. Much like how plants grew from the light of the sun, gods grew from the accumulation of quintessence. She felt that iota of rapture acquiring just a single quintessence from Doyle's prayer earlier. 719. That number represented the villagers' faith in her, and she cherished every point of it. It bothered her that she would have to spend some of it to make her abilities stronger, or if she wanted to have more powers. What happens after I've gotten 8,000 quintessence? After acquiring 8,000 quintessence, you are eligible to increase your divine rank from lesser god, dawn stage, to lesser god, ascendant stage. Additional abilities will be unlocked after each rank increase. Accumulated quintessence be reduced to 0. New limit of 16,000 will have to be met in order to ascend to the next divine rank. After eating the rest of the berries, Ebonheim left the small clearing and headed southward for a change of scenery. The direction led further into the thick forest, but she wanted to visit the small lake that was there. She walked across the dense foliage unimpeded. Leaves, small plants, and branches seemed to shift ever so slightly away from where she would step. Forest stride passive active. She smiled. A handy ability, given that the village is in a forest. It helped in her escape earlier as well. She probably had more abilities that she wasn't aware of, but she'll find out once she reaches her next destination. The forest grew thicker and denser as she continued to walk. The trees were evergreen and so dense that it was hard to see the sky through them. It was difficult to remember just how long it took for her to reach the lake. Ebonheim had a habit of taking random paths as she walked so that she could learn more about the forest and its inhabitants. She saw many small creatures on her path, none of which bothered her as she passed by them without incident. She soon found herself at the edge of a small lake. The water was crystal clear and cold to the touch. Ebonheim took a moment to sit down on a large fallen log near the shore. The bark was smooth and it felt comfortable under her butt. She pulled her feet up and rested them on her knees, letting the sunlight wash over her face and skin. She looked up to the sky through the trees and noticed a small bird passing by overhead. It swooped down towards the water, plopping down onto the surface of the lake. The ripples from its landing were all that remained in its wake. Ebonheim looked back at the water, watching the ripples move outwards from where the bird had landed. The water was like a mirror, showing her a reflection of herself and the forest around her. She found it peaceful. She closed her eyes and leaned back, letting her head dip forward. The cold water from the lake was pleasant against her skin. She opened her eyes and looked at the shore. The gentle waves lapped gently against the shore as they made their way back to the lake. She reached underneath the log and pulled out a small, flat rock. She tossed it into the water, watching it skip once, twice, 5 times before sinking below the surface. After a few moments, the ripples grew more distant until all that was left was the calm surface of the water. Ebonheim placed both hands on her hip and stood proudly. 26 agility right there. Silence greeted her. What was I going to do again? Oh yeah. She wanted to see what abilities she currently had. Innate abilities, manifestation, rank I, demanifestation, rank I, divine sight, rank I, domain administration, rank I, domain knowledge, rank I. She already used the first 3, but the last 2 were foreign to her. Domain administration, rank I. Effect. Administrator privilege to all bound objects within your domain. Domain knowledge, rank I. Effect, basic understanding of all objects and denizens within your domain. Ooh, I know the second part. That's probably why I knew you'd Oil, Thorson, Engine, and the others were even though it was the first time I'd met them. That's pretty useful. The administration part though, I'm not so sure about. Can you give me an example? Error. No bound objects within immediate vicinity. Guess I'll have to find one, probably on my own too. Thanks. She sighed. She looked back up to the sky and noticed another bird. This one was bigger than the first, flying much higher up. It swooped down towards the lake and landed nearby. She watched as it walked towards her, its beak opening with a loud squawk. Ebonheim didn't flinch or jump away, only staring at it. The bird cocked its head to the side and looked at her in return. It hopped up on the log beside her and looked down at her. Ebonheim leaned forward and extended her hand, patting the bird on the top of its head. Well, hello there, she said. The bird snorted and took a few steps back, sitting down on the log again. Ebonheim continued to pat it. You don't have a name, do you? No worries, I can give you one. What's your name? The bird looked at her with curiosity before suddenly squawking and opening its wings. It took her off into the sky and disappeared. Why, you didn't want me to name you? Come on, I'm a goddess. You could have been blessed or something. Ebonheim ruffled her hair and chuckled to herself, as she continued her laughter. A rustling in the foliage followed by a wet and squelching noise from behind her caught her attention. What is it this time, a doe? Well, you're not gonna get away from me naming you. Ebonheim looked over her shoulder at the thicket of underbrush. Her eyes widened as she saw a strange creature protruding out of the foliage. It was about 6 feet tall, vaguely frog-like in appearance, and had mottled green and brown skin that blended in with the surrounding trees and brush. Its skin had a slimy texture, as if covered in a layer of mucus, and appeared to be thick and tough. The creature's arms and legs were long and slender, ending in sharp, clawed fingers and toes that dug into the ground as it moved. Its body was thin and wiry, with a hunched posture that gave it an almost predatory appearance. Its head was wedge-shaped, with a wide mouth that opened and closed in a never-ending cycle. Its eyes were a bright yellow, and they glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, giving the impression that the creature was far more cunning and intelligent than its bestial form suggested. As the creature turned towards her, its lips pulled back, revealing rows of sharp teeth, long and curved, protruding from its gums like the tines of a fork. Well met. You don't happen to be a denizen of my domain, are you? She asked, though doubtful of any friendly response. It let out a piercing shriek that echoed through the forest. Its voice was a guttural, croaking sound, like the call of a large amphibian. It was both terrifying and hypnotic, drawing Ebonheim's attention towards the creature's slitted eyes. The creature's skin rippled and bulged as if something was moving underneath its surface, causing its appearance to shift and distort. It charged towards her. Ebonheim stood up and stepped backwards, letting her feet drag on the ground until she was standing on the edge of the lake. The creature stood at the shoreline and lunged at her. She dodged to the side and felt the cold water splash against her ankles. Ah, that's not a normal animal. What is that thing? Why is it attacking me? The creature jumped again at Ebonheim, but she ducked and dodged out of the way. It attacked her with either its claws or its maw, which was wide enough to swallow her whole. Alright, I get it. You're a monster and you don't want me to name you. Fine, I'll stop. The creature croaked at Ebonheim and took another leap. This time, it came from the side and landed on the log, its maw wide open. It lunged for her, but she jumped back and barely avoided its last attack, its claws merely a hair's breadth away from giving her neck some gills. She screamed and scampered toward the forest. This was the second time someone or something has chased her, except this time the pursuer was more able-bodied. She briefly glanced behind her and saw the creature barreling through the thickets, barely keeping up with her forest stride. She ran as fast as she could, but the creature was still on her tail. The long legs of the creature gave it a clear advantage over Ebonheim's nimbleness. She kept running and dodging. Did she have anything to fight back with? No offensive abilities acquired. Choose 5 starting abilities divided between active and passive abilities. Active ability list. Self-regeneration. I don't have time to pick and choose. Something's trying to eat me. Her lungs started to burn as she sprinted for her life. She glanced back in time to see the creature lunge at her. She leaned forward and rolled her body to the side, tucking into a ball. The creature jumped over her and landed where she had just been standing. It turned its head around to see her and hissed. Ebonheim took a moment to catch her breath. She was panting and her heart was beating rapidly. The creature stood up and walked closer, its eyes narrowed in determination. The creature lunged forward as Ebonheim maneuvered behind a tree. The creature collided with the tree with an audible thud, momentarily dazing it. That was all the time she needed to double her efforts and continue her escape. She happened upon one of the trails the villagers had paved and turned her direction to head towards the village. The creature was once again in pursuit. Wait, why was she running away from a mere monster? She was a goddess. Surely she could take it on and defeat it herself. What threat can a frog beast do anyways? A second frog-headed creature burst through the bushes right behind the first and joined the chase. Thorson, Bjorn, Engine, save me. I don't care if you put me back in that cage. Help. 20. Chapter 5, Hostile Aggro. The village in danger? Bjorn wiped the sweat off his brow as he carried the lumber down the trail to the main road. It was a hot day today, even for summertime in these mountains. The sun beat down hard on him and his tunic was soaked through with perspiration. He paused mid-stride and stopped dead in his tracks. A loud glottal roar reverberated throughout the forest, followed by several other similar sounds. They sounded like roars coming from giant beasts instead of animals, making them seem much larger than they actually were. He heard footsteps approaching along the path leading to the village and knew immediately what those steps meant. Someone was being chased. Bjorn set down the lumber he had been carrying and unsheathed his broadsword from its scabbard. This is no ordinary beast, he said to himself, preparing for battle. He waited for the creature to appear before him. A young girl dashed out from a side trail ahead of him, running toward him. The girl looked frightened as she got closer. Bjorn noted her distinctly unnatural iridescent hair. Before he could announce himself, another loud roar echoed through the forest and caused her to jump in fright. The creature emerged from the forest, roaring at its prey. Bjorn recognized the creature right away. It was an aberrant form of a creature known as a kungwon, a frog-headed monster not native to the valley, but Hilda and her druids went on an expedition a few days ago to cull their numbers before they could threaten the village. This was worrying. One shouldn't be this close to the village. Whoa there, young one. Don't worry, I'm here to help you, Bjorn called out to her. The girl never broke stride as she ran up to him, then jumped with her legs parted and used Bjorn's head as a springboard to vault over him, landing on the other side. Bjorn, be careful. There's 2 of them. the girl said to him. There's two. Bjorn turned his head and saw another Kangwon emerge from the dense foliage behind the first. These monsters weren't exactly easy to deal with. One was bad enough, but having to fend off two at the same time would make things difficult indeed. Keep away then, lass. Head to the village and call for Thorson or the other guards. He motioned for the girl to flee. The creature leapt at Bjorn, its claws slashing down at him. He dodged to the side, evading the attack, and parried its next swipe with his sword. He swung his blade downward at its leg, cutting deep into its flesh. The creature screeched loudly in pain. It fell backward onto the ground and struggled to stand back upright. It glared at Bjorn menacingly, its mouth gaping wide. The Kangwan's slime-covered hide had a fair resistance against mundane attacks, but what made fighting them more disadvantageous was their regeneration and endurance. Already he saw the cut he made slowly knit itself back together. Bjorn kicked the creature in the stomach, sending it flying backwards. He took a quick glance behind him to see the girl sprinting towards safety. The outskirts of the village wasn't that far. Once the girl tells a perimeter guard of the danger, reinforcements should soon follow. He just had to hold out until then. Before the first Kangwon regained its footing and leapt at him again, lunging with a series of swipes. Bjorn blocked each blow with practiced poise while swinging his sword in counterattacks. The second Kangwon leapt over him and continued its chase. Damn it! Bjorn cursed under his breath. Waiting for reinforcements would not be feasible if the guards had to deal with that monster inside the village. The remaining Kangwon started to force him on the defensive as it renewed its vigorous attacks. Bjorn would lose in a battle of endurance against this resilient creature unless he had the means inflict a grievous wound with a single attack. Already he was feeling the fatigue of fending off the Kangwon's blows. He didn't have time to waste fighting off one creature alone. After gaining some distance, he quickly drew his handaxe from its sheath and hurled it at the creature, hitting it squarely on the chest. His axe buried itself halfway into the creature's torso. The Kangwon shrieked in agony, thrashing wildly about as it stumbled on its back. Bjorn took that time to run after the Kangwon that got past him earlier. Ebonheim watched as the creature leapt from the treetop and crashed down onto the dirt below, causing a large cloud of dust to rise up. She couldn't believe how agile it was despite its size and bulkiness. She continued running down the trail and saw a clearing that contained many houses nestled together. Several villagers were gathered outside talking amongst themselves, unaware of the commotion happening nearby. Run, run, Ebonheim shouted, hoping to alert anyone who might hear her. Her voice was lost amidst the din of the creature's thunderous roar. The villagers noticed the creature charging behind her and scattered in every direction, some heading to safer areas within their homes while others fled deeper into the woods. Two men garbed in leather armor and armed with spears rushed out to confront the creature. Back away slowly and keep your weapons ready, one yelled. They both held their spear tips high above their heads to ward off any attacks from the creature. Ebonheim ran behind them before turning around. Where is Thorson? She asked. Thorson? No one knows where he went this afternoon. The creature lunged at them with its clawed hands raised high overhead. Ebonheim leapt back while both men moved aside and deflected the creature's attack with their spears, keeping their distance from the creature. The creature's powerful jaws snapped shut on empty air when it tried to bite them. It roared in frustration as it reared its head back to unleash a flurry of punches at the two warriors. The men retreated farther, taking cover behind the nearest house. The creature charged forward once again. One of the men threw his spear at the creature, striking it between its shoulder blades. The creature staggered back, momentarily stunned by the sudden impact, but it recovered swiftly and attacked again, striking the unarmed warrior's chest hard enough to send him flying through the air. The other man managed to dodge most of the blows, but several landed solidly on his shoulders, knocking him to the ground. Another pair of villagers emerged from beyond the nearby houses, wielding swords in their hands. They circled around the creature cautiously, readying themselves for a fight. Stay back, lads, the injured warrior shouted. You'll only end up dead if you try to face. The creature struck the wounded man with a vicious punch, knocking him unconscious. Ebonheim gasped at the sight. The creature seemed too strong for even seasoned warriors to handle. She had to do something to help them. Anything. The system popped up on her peripheral and started listing names of abilities, as if prompting her to choose, but there was no time. Just find me something to immobilize that. Divine ability, Vines of the Bramble King, rank I. Effect, conjures vines from the earth or nearby flora to constrict one target. The vines have 25 health, 20 physical defense, 5 damage reduction versus blunt and piercing physical damage. The vines can also be used to bind objects to other objects. You can concentrate to animate the vines. Range: 10 meters. Duration: until destroyed or cancelled. Cost: 15 essence. Good enough. She chose that ability and a rush of information detailing its use flooded her mind. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, acquired. She took a step forward and closed her eyes, focusing her mind and calling upon her divine powers. She reached out to the earth beneath her feet, feeling its warmth and vitality flow through her body. She focused all her energy on sprouting vines from the soil, wrapping around the creature's limbs and torso. Vines grew out from the ground and wrapped around its ankles, slowing its movements and preventing it from moving freely. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, activated. Essence: 51, greater than 36. As the creature attempted to break free, its jaw opened wider than ever before, revealing row after row of jagged teeth. The beast snarled angrily as it tore at the vines with its teeth and claws. Vines health: 25, greater than 11. Vines health: 11, greater than 0. Are you kidding me, already? She gritted her teeth and focused her will once again to entangle the creature. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, activated. Essence: 36, greater than 21. Vines health: 25, greater than 15. Vines health: 15, greater than 3. Vines health: 3, greater than 0. Oh, come on. Ebonheim squinted her eyes as she renewed the entanglement. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, activated. Essence: 21, greater than 6. More vines shot forth from the ground and latched onto its arms, legs, and head, holding it tightly as the previous grip loosened. The creature shook its head violently, trying to shake loose its restraints. Vines health: 25, greater than 12. Vines snapped and cracked under the force of its struggle, leaving broken tendrils dangling from its body. Yet more vines continued to grow rapidly to replace those severed. Vines health: 12, greater than 0. You do not have the requisite essence to use divine ability, Entangle. Rank I. You are allowed to convert health into essence at a ratio of 3 to 1. Would you like to convert health into essence? She didn't even need to think about her response. The answer was obvious. Conversion initiated. Health: 190, greater than 145. Essence: 6, greater than 21. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, activated. Essence: 21, greater than 6. Ebonheim kept growing new vines in response to the creature's efforts to escape, covering its entire torso in seconds. She could feel the life within her begin to drain as she fought desperately against the creature's strength, using everything that she had left in order to slow it down. Vines health: 25, greater than 12. Vines health: 12, greater than 0. Conversion initiated. Health: 145, greater than 100. Essence: 6, greater than 21. Divine ability: Vines of the Bramble King. Rank I, activated. Essence: 21, greater than 6. The creature lashed out with a mighty swing of its clawed hand, which knocked one villager to the ground. Another villager rushed in close and slashed open the creature's belly with his sword. The creature screamed in agony as blood poured from the wound. With its attention diverted, Ebonheim wrapped a final vine around the creature's maw with all her remaining power. The last vestiges of her essence drained from her body, leaving her weakened and exhausted. Her vision blurred as she slumped to the ground. A pair of hands grabbed her by her shoulders and dragged her away from the creature. She looked up to find Bjorn standing over her, panting heavily from exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked. I'm fine," she replied weakly, still catching her breath. "Just give me a moment." Bjorn nodded and let go of her. As he turned around to check on the other villagers, Ebonheim rose unsteadily to her feet. She felt a throbbing pain in her temples, and her vision began to blur again as the creature started to pull itself free from the vines that bound it. Vines health: 25, greater than 15. "No!" Bjorn exclaimed, rushing towards the creature. Suddenly, the second creature arrived and tackled Bjorn from the side, knocking him backward and sending him crashing into the side of the house. He slid along the wall, falling to the ground. Ebonheim heard the sound of approaching footsteps, and she spun around to see two more warriors emerge from a nearby trail. One carried a large mace while the other brandished a long sword and a studded shield. Their faces were grim, their eyes filled with determination. While the first creature continued to tear at its bindings, the second creature charged forward, swinging its fist wildly, smashing into the first warrior and bowling him over like a ragdoll. The second warrior blocked another blow from the creature's claws with his shield, deflecting it harmlessly away. The creature quickly reversed its stance and kicked the warrior in the gut with its foot, dropping him to the ground. The warrior rolled over, spun around and with his momentum slashed at the creature's throat. The creature dodged the strike and leapt straight upward, landing atop the roof of a nearby hut. Ebonheim rushed towards Bjorn and helped him stand upright. "What do we do now?" she whispered urgently. "We need to stop this thing somehow," he said, gasping for breath. "If it gets further inside the village, many people will die." Ebonheim glanced around frantically. There weren't any trees near them for her to use her magic. She needed something else, something big. She scanned the area and spotted a fallen tree trunk by the edge of the clearing. "Bjorn, I have an idea. Can you corral those two monsters towards that spot over there and keep them there?" She pointed towards a spot between a nearby hut and a tree. Bjorn nodded and picked up his sword. The remaining able-bodied warriors joined his side as they charged at the creature that finally freed itself from the vines, while the one atop the hut jumped down to join the melee. Ebonheim scampered toward the fallen log and channeled the essence that sustained her physical form and used it as fuel to use her ability once more. Conversion initiated. Health, 100, greater than 55. Essence, 6, greater than 21. Divine ability, Vines of the Bramble King, rank I, activated. Essence, 21, greater than 6. Vines spewed forth from the ground underneath the log, coiling around it while others snaked through the air to wrap around two nearby trees. She focused her will and the vines grow thicker and stronger by the second, weaving together to form a sturdy sling. With a deep breath, Ebonheim grips the vines and pulls back, the muscles in her arms bulging with effort. The log rose off the ground, swaying back and forth as she aimed it towards the snarling monsters. The vines creak and strain, but they hold fast, allowing Ebonheim to take careful aim. She watched as Bjorn and his men maneuvered to coerce the creatures towards the spot she designated. "Bjorn, I'm ready. Get out of the way," Ebonheim shouted. As Bjorn and his men dodged out of the way, Ebonheim released the log with a mighty yell, sending it hurtling through the air towards the creatures. The log spins wildly, the vines unwinding from around the trees as the log gained speed. The creatures saw the log coming and tried to dodge out of the way, but it was too late. The log crashed into them with a resounding thud, sending them tumbling backwards. They landed hard on the ground, stunned and dazed from the impact. Ranged attack, direct hit. 25% of damage resisted. Physical damage 70. Ebonheim's legs buckled from exhaustion and she collapsed onto her knees. Her vision blurred even worse than before, and she struggled to breathe. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, threatening to burst through her ribs. She closed her eyes and concentrated on breathing deeply until the feeling passed. When her vision returned, she noticed that both creatures were already moving again and engaged in melee with Bjorn and the other warriors. The creatures wore grievous injuries sustained from Bjorn's and the others' attacks, as well as hers. She did do something to help. She did contribute. But why did she feel that it still wasn't enough? Why did she think it was a good idea to go seek help from the villagers in the first place? These creatures were obviously a danger to them. Why would their goddess bring them danger? The creatures jumped over Bjorn and charged towards Ebonheim. Bjorn yelled from behind them, looking at her in alarm. She tried to move but her strength failed her. She could only stare, eyes glazed, in bewilderment at how things unfolded. Nothing seemed to go right for her today. The nearest creature reached towards her throat with its claws. She braced herself for the worst. The faint scent of chamomile and rosemary wafted through the air. The sweet, comforting aroma enveloped Ebonheim's senses. Roots burst from the ground beneath the charging creatures and wrapped themselves around their bodies, constricting their movements. The creatures tried to struggle while suspended in the air, but the roots remained unyielding. This wasn't her doing. Those roots were many times thicker and hardier than the measly vines she could produce. Thank the goddess we've arrived in time," said the gentle voice of an elderly woman from behind her. Once more, The voice seemed familiar despite hearing it for the first time. Tears welled up underneath Ebonheim's eyes. A soft breeze brushed against Ebonheim's cheeks as the leaves rustled above her head. She turned her gaze behind her and met the smiling visage of Hilda. Approaching her with a walking cane at hand, Hilda stepped closer and lowered her hands. She smiled warmly down upon the exhausted deity. "It's all right," she said softly, reaching out with her hand to stroke Ebonheim's forehead. "You're safe now." Ebonheim leaned into the touch, savoring the sensation of being cared for after such a harrowing ordeal. "I'll make sure your wounds heal properly." Hilda stroked Ebonheim's cheek gently, brushing away some of the tears streaming down her face. "But first, I need to finish some work." Ebonheim watched Hilda's silver eyes glimmer briefly as the elder woman cast her spell. Hilda tapped her cane onto the ground. Shimmering lichen sprouted from the roots around the creatures and released spores that drifted slowly through the air. The spores took root inside them, growing into small plants that began to spread throughout their bodies, wrapping around their limbs like ivy. The effects didn't seem immediate, but soon the creatures stiffened and grew rigid. Their heads drooped forward, their mouths gaping open in silent screams. Soon, their bodies went limp, their chests no longer rising and falling. "There we are," said Hilda, satisfied. Ebonheim looked over at Bjorn and his men approaching. "Hilda, you're back earlier than expected." "How did you know to come here?" asked Bjorn as he sheathed his blade, his voice strained with fatigue. "The noise mostly," answered Hilda. She smiled and reached up to pat Bjorn's shoulder. "You and your men did well staving off the Kungwen with ordinary weapons." Bjorn sighed and rubbed his neck, looking back at the corpses entangled in the roots. I was caught ill-prepared and didn't have my proper blade with me." He looked back at Hilda. "I trust your expedition went well then?" "Where are the other druids?" "We finished earlier than expected. However, we didn't expect stragglers to have come this far. I asked the others to scout the area around the village to make sure we didn't miss any more. We also came across Thorsten earlier when he was wandering the forest." Bjorn nodded. "Well, I'm glad you made it back in time. I would have had nightmares to contend with if they'd gotten to this young one." He turned to look down at Ebonheim. He smiled, but then tilted his head and looked at her curiously. "I've no memory of meeting a young one like you until today." He looked back at Hilda. "Is she a child from your tribe?" Before Ebonheim or Hilda could answer, Thorsten stormed out of the woods from where Hilda had emerged before and marched behind Ebonheim, promptly picking her up by her head once again. Ebonheim neither had the energy nor the will to resist and could feel the familiar squeeze of Thorsten's fingertips on her head. "Finally caught you, you little bugger," Thorsten said. "Back in the cage you go." Ebonheim could only mumble. "Okay." 22. Chapter 6. Diplomacy check. Secrets of the Ebon Tree revealed. The air was heavy with trepidation in the feast hall as the elders exchanged furtive glances, each harboring their own doubts and fears. Engine cleared his throat and spoke first, his voice reasonable and steady. "First, we must discuss the matter of that girl over there who proclaims to be Ebonheim." Engine pointed toward Ebonheim, sitting quietly inside the wooden cage by the corner. "She claims to be the deity of our village, but we all know that to be impossible. And I asked around to see if she is anyone's child," said Thorsten. "No one's claimed her, so she is not from our village." "Who or what is she then?" asked Bjorn. "She displayed druidic powers, I can attest to that. And she did help in dealing with the Kungwen, so she doesn't seem a threat to our village." "So why does she claim to be a goddess?" Engine shook his head and sighed. "I don't understand either. I've already had this conversation with the girl earlier today and nothing conclusive came out of it except that she is clever and has nimble feet." Bogdan raised his hand. "Doesn't the celestial realm smite you for impersonating a god?" Engine nodded. "Aye. But that's only true if you speak it within that god or another god's dominion. Since our deity doesn't actually exist, nothing would happen." "So what are the other possibilities?" asked Sven. Engine scratched his chin. "I can only think of 3 possibilities. The first is that she is a human who has druidic powers. If that's the case, then she belongs to a family outside of our village that we haven't encountered yet. However, I find that rather unlikely because she has shown to have intimate knowledge about us that no outsider should know about. And the second? The second is that she really is a goddess who just happened upon our village, realized we fabricated our deity, and decided to try and fool us into thinking that she is the very same that we envisioned. That doesn't make sense. Why would a real god go through the trouble of impersonating a fake god if they knew that we made that god up? Asked Bogdan. Thorson shrugged. I don't know, maybe because she's stupid. Sven sat straight up in his chair, leaning forward. What are you talking about? This girl doesn't look or even act like any god or goddess I've ever met. Not that I've met many, directly, but the only unusual traits of hers are her hair and eyes. Alright. And she apparently has druidic powers, but so do Hilda and the other druids in her tribe. Besides, I've also heard that the powers that girl displayed couldn't even defeat a Kungwin. You expect us to believe that someone that weak is a goddess? Karina leaned forward as well and whispered something to Ionis. Ionis responded with a nod and a smirk. Gods can't impersonate another, Ionis stated plainly. Each god has a name that's tied to their nature and ego. They can't pretend to be someone else. They can't just switch roles like actors in a play. Their name is tied to their very being. Engine glanced over at Ebonheim, who stared blankly ahead with unblinking golden eyes. He shrugged. Then both possibilities seem unlikely. It's looking more like what I surmised earlier, which was the third possibility. She is more likely some other spirit that has taken on a human form and is trying to impersonate a god. I don't know why a spirit would do that, and I haven't heard of any tales of spirits impersonating gods before. Either way, we can't progress in this matter until we hear her side of things. Thorson grunted in agreement. Bjorn rose from his seat. Agreed. If she is neither a human child nor a true deity, but a mischievous spirit, then perhaps she has lived in this region before us, and only now did we encounter her. In which case, we might learn quite a lot from her if she cooperates. And if she refuses to cooperate with us? Asked Thorson. Then we can always try force-feeding her answers until she tells us what we need to know, added Levin. Ionis looked away, embarrassed by his friend's statement. Thorson snorted. Force-feed her? You make it sound like we're interrogating a criminal here. Just because she may or may not be a divine being doesn't excuse our behavior. We have no reason to mistreat her or use violence against her. Ebonheim coughed in the corner. Engine gave Thorson a knowing glance. Thorson looked between Engine and Ebonheim, covered his face with his palm, then coughed. Levin shook his head. I'm not saying we should mistreat her. I'm just saying that if she won't cooperate, we'll have to do something about it. Like what? Ionis asked. Levin smirked. Well, he paused briefly, looking around the room for support. None of the elders seemed willing to join him in voicing their opinion. I don't know. Forget about it. I spoke out of line again, didn't I? Engine rolled his eyes. Yes, you did, but let's get back on topic, shall we? Do any of you have anything else to add? As the elders continued their deliberations, each with their own doubts and misgivings, it became clear that no consensus would be reached by mere speculation. The torchlight flickered, as though echoing their uncertainty, casting a chiaroscuro of doubt across the gathering. Engine raised a hand, silencing the growing din of voices. We are no closer to the truth than when he began, he conceded, his voice resonating with authority. Let us bring forth the girl and allow her to speak for herself. Thorson nodded and walked to the girl. He opened the cage and gestured for her to come outside. She hesitated, unsure of what to expect. Then she slowly stepped out of the cage and walked over to stand next to Thorson. All eyes turned to her, curiosity piqued. Silence enveloped the group as they observed her approach. Ebonheim stood still, studying each face with intent, anticipating someone to break the quiet. Now, explain yourself. This time, don't try to run away, Engine said. Ebonheim's shoulders slouched as she sighed. Déjà vu. Instead of dealing with just Engine and Thorson, this time she had to convince all of the elders. Somehow everyone looked at her with a scrutinizing gaze except for Hilda, who was in her own little world, sipping her cup of tea while looking outside a nearby window. It's only been a couple of hours since the Kungwin were dealt with, and now she's facing a different battlefield. This one was definitely harder. She placed her hands on her hips and looked eye to eye at each elder in turn. I'm not a human. Then you're a spirit, Sven interrupted. No, I'm not a spirit. At least, I don't think I am, unless gods are spirits. Then yes? Ebonheim answered. The thought never really crossed her mind. Every essence of her being, every bit of her newly formed memories since her awakening, and even the Akashic system that she has interacted with reinforced the idea that she was a divine being. I am Ebonheim, she continued. I don't know how much more clearly I can explain it. I know who everyone is in this village. Even though this is my first time meeting you, most of you anyways, I know a little bit of who you are. She knew my name, how old I was, and when I was born, Thorson said. No one could have told her all of that beforehand. The other elders looked amongst themselves. I'll prove it again, just in case you have doubts, Ebonheim said. Divine Sight, rank I, activated. Essence, 24, greater than 19. A gentle radiance emanated from her eye. She looked at each elder once again before speaking. Engin, Thorson, Bjorn, Sven, Bogdan, Ionis, Adet, Karina, Bertram, Brutsenk, Levin, Gunter, Renfred, Elaine, Franco, and Hilda. Bogdan threw his hands up. All right, I'm convinced. She's a goddess. That's not impressive, Sven said as he hid behind Bjorn. Any mage who has learned a few cantrips could do that. Ebonheim's eyes twitched as she glared towards Sven, causing him to slink further back behind Bjorn. Cantrip? Did he just compare her divine sight that could reveal anyone's secrets to a mere cantrip? Sven, that adorable but balding Edget. She'll remember this slight. If he ever asked for her blessing to grow his hair back, he'll be in for quite a surprise. Can you show anything else? Engin asked. The gods that I am accustomed to seeing usually have an aura about them that imposes their will upon others. This may seem a bit frank, but you do not exhibit an intimidating presence, and it's not just because of your appearance. An aura? Ebonheim crossed her arms and tapped her foot as she thought. If that's what it took to convince them, then she might as well select it as one of her abilities. Searching for relevant ability. Divine ability. Divine aura, rank I. Effect, manifests an aura around you. The aura acts as a barrier with 300 health, 25 arcane defense, 25 divine defense, 25 physical defense, 10 damage reduction. All. The aura imposes penalties to any hostile beings without a divine rank. -5 attack, all. -5 defense, all. -5% hit chance, -5% block chance, -5% dodge chance. Duration, until destroyed or cancelled. Cost, 30 essence. Requirement, lesser god, ascendant stage. Ebonheim blinked. Last time she checked, the system said she was at the dawn stage. She needed to get more quintessence before ranking up to twilight stage. Ebonheim twiddled her thumbs together and looked up at Engin meekly. Well, I'm not quite powerful enough to have an aura, but hear me out. I was just born earlier today. You can't hold that against me. Can you? Engin looked at the others and shrugged. Seems like we're still at an impasse. I'm not sure what else to do about this. Does anyone have any other ideas? The other elders whispered amongst themselves, their expressions reflecting their skepticism. What say you, Hilda? Bjorn asked. Hilda set her cup down and raised her cane slightly. It gave her an aura of authority that caused the other elders to fall silent. She is a goddess, that I have no doubt, Hilda stated plainly. How can you be so sure? Engin asked. We druids, as you may well know by now, are intrinsically attuned to nature and the spirits within the world. Gods are, in essence, a type of spiritual being, albeit a divine one. That essence has its own color, its own form, and its own signature that makes it distinct from other spirits. In my eyes, this girl bears the same divine essence. Ebonheim watched the other elders' solemn expressions, their eyes darting back and forth to perhaps consider Hilda's revelation. Why didn't you say something earlier? Engin asked. I felt it important for you to voice your concerns and ideas first. Gently pushing her way through the group of elders, Hilda approached Ebonheim and reached out to pat her head. The only question remains, is if she really is the goddess we envisioned. I'm sure there is one task she can perform that would solidify her claim. Wouldn't you say so, Ionis? Ionis raised an eyebrow then rubbed the bridge of his nose in contemplation. Gods who have been accepted by the people have authority over certain aspects of the domain. The god of my old hometown had power over the wheat that grew in our fields. If this girl really is Ebonheim, then the one aspect of our village that she has authority over is the ebon trees. Engin interrupted. The other elders murmured their assent. Daylight is waning and there is quite the crowd waiting in anticipation outside, Hilda said as she turned to face the others. Let us not waste too much time with further debate. Engin nodded. Very well. Everyone, let us head to the nearest ebon tree. Thorson, escort the girl. Thorson looked down at Ebonheim. She raised her hands. I promise I won't run off again. This means much more to me than you realize. Let's go." Ebonheim and the elders left the feast hall. Outside, it seemed like the entire village of 700 people waited in silence. Engine was the first to approach and explained what transpired inside. "We're off to that ebon tree over there." He pointed behind the crowd towards the eastern edge of the commons where the dark, weathered form of an ebon tree towered over the oaks and pines. The crowd parted as the elders escorted Ebonheim to the tree. She saw many curious and skeptical gazes were thrown her way, causing her heart to race even more compared to before. This was her biggest, and perhaps only chance to earn her welcome. The group stopped beneath the ebon tree, its tall and slender trunk stretching upward the sky like a pitch-black spear. The branches of the ebon tree are long and slender, reaching outward like skeletal fingers, each one tipped with sharp, needle-like leaves that glint darkly in the sunlight. Engine placed a hand against the tree and looked over at Ebonheim. "Our goddess and village bear the name of Ebonheim, born from these ancient trees that dot this valley. It is the ebon tree's resilience that inspired us to choose such a name. Unlike its kin that falters and succumbs to fire and steel, the ebon tree stands tall and impervious. If you are whom you claim, then show us the secrets of this tree." Ebonheim approached the tree and looked at it carefully. In the short time that she's existed, she always felt a strong affinity towards this type of tree compared to the others. She placed her hands on the tree as Engine stepped back to join the other elders in watching her. Domain administration, passive ability, rank I. Bound object detected. Ebon tree, special qualities, 30 arcane defense, 25 divine defense, 40 physical defense, 15 damage reduction, all. Harvestability, none. Her eyes widened. Engine wasn't exaggerating. This was one tough tree. She wondered how the other types of trees compared. At least now she knew what her other ability was for. It seemed to present her specific information about things like this ebon tree compared to general knowledge about things that her domain knowledge granted her. She wasn't really sure how this information would help her though. She stared at the word harvestability. Were all trees supposed to be harvestable? Edit mode. Select the harvestability for the bound object ebon tree. Options: none, limited, all. None, object will not change to type resource after being felled. Limited, object will be changed to type resource after being felled by denizens under your domain. All, object will be changed to type resource after being felled by any force. Object will temporarily lose its enhanced defensive properties when being harvested if limited or all is selected. Is that really how it works? Ebonheim asked. She willed the change to happen. Limited option is selected. Domain administration, passive ability, rank I. Bound object detected. Ebon tree, special qualities, 30 arcane defense, 25 divine defense, 40 physical defense, 15 damage reduction, all. Harvestability, limited. Ebonheim looked back at the elders and the large crowd of people behind them. "So I'm not sure about showing you its secrets, but I am allowing you to be able to harvest these trees. Is that good enough to convince you that I am Ebonheim?" Murmurs resounded throughout the crowd. Bjorn and Thorson approached the ebon tree with trepidation, their axes ready. They had tried to chop it down before, numerous times throughout the years, but it seemed impossible. Its dark, almost black bark was tougher than any they had ever seen. They looked at Ebonheim who stood behind them. She nodded her head as if bidding them to start. They swung their axes with all their might, determined to make a dent. Each blow reverberated throughout the forest. Both of them expected to see no sign of damage, but this time, the bark cracked slightly. Bjorn and Thorson looked at each other in surprise, unsure of what was happening. As they continued to strike the tree seemed to shudder and quake, as though in response to their efforts. With each blow from the axes, the bark gave way, revealing the dark wood underneath. The crowd watched in amazement as the two burly warriors continued to hack away, their muscles straining with the effort. As the tree started to sway, they stepped back, watching in awe as the massive trunk fell to the ground with a resounding thud. Bjorn and Thorson whooped in triumph, their faces flushed with exertion and excitement. Engine's mouth dropped in awe. Though what just transpired was a miraculous event, he could only stare at the girl smiling brightly as she patted the two men on their backs in congratulations and danced around them in joy. He heard the cheers from the crowd behind him, with many people rushing past to gather around the girl. His doubts seemed to fade with every passing breath. Engine felt Hilda's presence beside him. He turned to see her looking at the girl with a gentle gaze. "I've never heard of gods being born from the collective beliefs of people," Engine said. "There have been no records of this happening in all of history." "Then perhaps we are the first to witness this miracle," Hilda said. "This girl. Ebonheim, we are all responsible for her existence." "You especially." "Me?" Hilda chuckled. "It was your idea in the first place, if you recall. Now that the idea has become reality, you'd best not get cold feet. That would be unbecoming of a man of your conviction." Engine rubbed his neck and sighed as he watched Ebonheim laugh merrily with the others. The entire crowd gathered closely around them. A warm smile crept upon his lips. "You speak no truer words. Though, I suspect there will be less peaceful times ahead." 20. Chapter 7, Village 101. 8th day of Lustertide, 1366. Ebonheim opened her eyes. The first rays of sunlight streamed in through the window, illuminating the inside of her hut. She stretched her arms over her head, arching her back, and let out a contented sigh. She rolled onto her side and propped herself on one elbow, gazing at her surroundings. The hut had a single room with a sleeping platform by the corner. It was made from sturdy logs cut into rectangles, which formed a frame. The top part of the platform, where she slept, had a thin cushion laid atop the wood, covered by a blanket. The rest of the platform consisted of two benches, which folded up during the day. One side held her belongings, and the other held a basin and a bucket. A small fire burned in a stone hearth in the center of the room. The hut had been built by the villagers themselves. It wasn't fancy, but it did have a certain rustic charm. The walls and roof were made from sturdy timbers, and the roof was thatched with bundles of straw. The floorboards creaked softly underfoot, adding to the cozy, rustic feel of the space. The ceiling consisted of wooden rafters, which were visible between layers of thatch. Small gaps between the thatch allowed shafts of light to filter through, giving the room a warm and inviting glow. She got off the bed and stretched again. Her muscles ached pleasantly, and she smiled to herself. She thought back at what she had accomplished since that fateful day. The past month had been a whirlwind of activity, leaving Ebonheim physically and mentally exhausted every night. Ebonheim spent her days exploring the village and interacting with its residents. She walked through the village trails, visiting their homes and farms. She greeted everyone she met with a smile and a kind word, asked questions about the village and its people, and listened carefully as they told her stories and shared their experiences. She watched as children played games and sang songs, laughed along with them as they made jokes, and she wiped away their tears when they wept. She enjoyed the moments she spent with each and everyone, whether they had anything special to share or not. It wasn't always easy, though. People sometimes didn't want to talk to her. Some kept their distance, while others actively avoided her. Some villagers went about their daily chores with little interest in engaging with her. Still, Ebonheim persevered. She spent hours talking to people, learning about their lives, and trying to make a good impression. She hoped they would begin to trust her more and open up to her. During that time, the Akashic system displayed information regarding the village itself rather than her own. Village name, Ebonheim. Population, 717. Quintessence per month, 830. Professions. Farmers, 276 people. Hunters and gatherers, 77 people. Miner, 32 people. Craftsmen, 123 people. Guards and soldiers, 70 people. Druids and arcanists, 20 people. Healers, 43 people. Village elders, 16 people. Unskilled, 60 people. Age distribution. Children, ages 0 to 14, 103 people. Adults, ages 15 to 64, 552 people. Seniors, ages 65 plus, 62 people. Devotion rank distribution. Unbeliever, 0 people. Follower, 584 people. Believer, 125 people. Worshipper, 8 people. Devotee, 0 people. Faithful, 0 people. Disciple, 0 people. Devout, 0 people. Zealot, 0 people. Building types. Houses, 163. Farms, 44. Workshops, 32. Guard towers, 4. Market square, 1. Special resources. Ebon trees. Mine, iron. copper. She spent her nights before bed poring through the details but always ended up dozing off and forgetting about most of what she's learned the next morning. The amount of information presented by the system was overwhelming, with extensive details about each term, correlations between terms, hierarchies, and numeric values, all seemingly endless. There were too many things to keep track of, and her average intelligence was proving to be inefficient. Perhaps next time she should invest more points into her intelligence stat. The elders have done a good job managing the village and there seemed no need for Ebonheim to tackle that role. Maybe not yet. She already had a lot on her plate building rapport with the villagers. Going out and interacting with her people felt more gratifying than reading through layers and layers of text. Ebonheim emerged from her small hut with a small wooden bucket at hand and walked outside, eager to start the day's work. She stretched out her arms, enjoying the warmth on her skin as the morning air caressed her body. She reached behind her head and unbraided her long iridescent hair. It fell in waves over her shoulders and back, gleaming like liquid mercury under the sun. She breathed deeply, savoring the smell and taste of the air. She walked past several houses until she reached the village well. After filling her bucket, she headed back to her hut, walking past the fields where the men were working. The sound of their voices drifted across the field as they talked among themselves, sharing jokes and stories. A few glanced her way, smiling warmly, before going back to work. Once she got back to her hut, Ebonheim set the bucket down beside the hearth and inspected the fire from the single log from the ebon tree that Bjorn and Thorsen felled. The log still burned just as intensely as the nights before. Ebon log, X1, resource type. Fuel burns 100 times longer than other hardwood of similar mass, plus 10% to cooking and brewing. After Ebonheim explained this property of the ebon tree to the villagers, everyone wanted at least one in their household. She watched as the log burned slowly and steadily, without any need for additional wood or adjustments to the fire. She filled a small iron pot with water from the bucket and placed it on the metal grate above the log. As the water began to heat, she retrieved some vegetables and herbs from a nearby shelf, chopping them into small pieces and adding them to the pot. She stirred the mixture with a large wooden spoon, inhaling the fragrant aroma of the herbs as they began to release their flavors into the soup. During the times she spent talking with the villagers, several of the womenfolk taught Ebonheim how to cook various dishes and this simple soup was one of them. Once properly simmered, she ladled the hot soup into a bowl and ate slowly while looking at the commons through her open window. As Ebonheim raised the spoon to her lips, she savored the aroma of the hot, steaming soup. But just as she took a sip, a sudden gruff cough erupted from the side of the window, causing her to choke on her broth. To her surprise, she jolted backward and fumbled her grasp of the bowl, spilling its contents down the front of her dress. The scalding liquid burned as it soaked through the fabric, causing Ebonheim to yelp in both pain and surprise. She stumbled backward, flailing her arms as she tried to regain her balance, only to find herself slipping on the spilled soup and landing unceremoniously on the floor with a loud thud. As she lay there, squirming and writhing, Ebonheim couldn't help but feel like a hapless fool. She flailed her arms and legs, trying to find some semblance of balance, but all she could manage were a series of awkward, twitching movements that only served to make her look more ridiculous. The soup that had spilled on her chest had now seeped down into her undergarments, and she could feel the hot liquid burning against her skin in all the wrong places. She let out a pained groan, half from embarrassment and half from discomfort, as she tried to find a way to stand up without making things worse. The gruff cough from outside had now turned into a full-blown fit of laughter. Thorsen's laughter. She wobbled towards the door and opened it to see Thorsen's towering form, hands on his belly, laughing like a walrus gasping for air. Ebonheim's eyes twitched as she glared at him while wrinkling her face into a forced smile. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" she asked. "I only meant to grab your attention," Thorsen responded. "The rest of that was your own doing, which by the way, is unbecoming of a goddess. Anyone would have been startled when you did that." She threw a flurry of playful jabs that bounced harmlessly on Thorsen's belly, causing him to laugh even harder. Thorsen folded his arms across his chest, his expression turning serious. "Well, I guess you should probably get changed before we meet with the other elders," he said as he waved his hand in a gesture for her to close the door. Ebonheim grumbled and nodded, Closing the door, she focused her mind on using her divine power. She ended up taking it as one of her other starting abilities. Divine ability, divine cantrip activated. Essence, 190, greater than 185. The air around her seemed to shimmer with energy. A soft breeze stirred the leaves of nearby trees, and the scent of freshly fallen rain filled the air. With a flick of her wrist, Ebonheim conjured a small burst of divine energy, directing it towards her soiled clothes. Instantly, the soup stains began to fade away, replaced by the clean, unblemished fabric beneath. She repeated the process, cleaning the floor until the room once again smelled fresh and pleasant. She headed back outside. "All right, you big lug, to the feast hall." Thorson bowed in an overdramatic way towards her. "At your command, a goddess." Ebonheim stuck her tongue out at him. The duo headed up the trail towards the feast hall. "You've been busy this past month," Thorson said. "You'll be off to do your usual routine after the meeting, I take it?" Ebonheim nodded while glancing at the message displayed by the Akashic system. Daily quest complete. 03. Quest 1. Gather herbs and plants from the forest for use in medicines and food. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Quest 2. Assist with farming and harvesting crops. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Quest 3. Assist with tending the village's livestock. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Quest 4. Assist with building new structures within the village. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Quest 5. Patrol the outskirts of the village and ensure the safety of its inhabitants from any potential threats. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Quest 6. Repeatable quest, increase a villager's devotion rank by 1. Completion reward, 5 quintessence. Earlier in the month, the system provided her with a list of quests, 3 of which she could complete each day. The 6th quest varied each day, ranging from helping a villager with a specific task to giving advice or mediating between 2 or more people. Between accumulating quintessence passively every month and upon completion of her daily quests, getting to the next divine rank wouldn't take too much time if she was diligent about her work. "That's right," she answered. "There's always things to do for the village, so if there's anything you need, let me know." "I might take you up on that," he said. The pair reached the entrance of the hall and walked inside. Engine and the rest of the elders greeted them as they entered. Ebonheim took her seat at the head of the table. The other elders sat around the table in a semicircle facing her. Engine cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. I only have a few things to report today. Firstly, thanks to Ebonheim's blessings, all of our crops will be yielding twice their usual harvest this year." Some elders applauded, and others voiced their appreciation. Ebonheim placed her hands on her hips and smiled with pride. "It's the least I could do." Name, Fecundity of Creation. Effect, this ability enhances the fertility of the soil and the growth of the crops, resulting in a doubled yield of the harvest. The plants grow stronger and healthier, with larger and more plentiful fruits, vegetables, and grains. Range, 1 acre of land. Duration, until the next harvest season. The ability continues to affect the crops until they are ready to be harvested. Cost, 40 essence. It was a good choice to pick Fecundity of Creation as one of her new abilities. "You did more than that," Hilda replied. "You restored the faith we had lost in gods, which is no small feat." No small feat indeed," Engine said. "You've also been making your way around the village and your contributions have been more than welcome." "I'm glad to be of service," Ebonheim replied. She took a moment to assess the faces of each elder, trying to get a feel for their mood. "So, what else is on your minds?" "Well," Engine continued, "while we are very thankful for having such a kind and generous goddess." Engine fidgeted slightly as he looked at her. "There's been some complaints. Very small ones mind you. About you being, how do I say, weak." Bjorn finished the sentence. Ebonheim blinked. "Eh?" Thorson let out another thunderous laugh. Engine shook his head and smiled. "We're not saying you're weak," he said. "It's just that some of us can't help but feel that we've grown accustomed to deities being strong and powerful. It's hard to adjust to a goddess who is so puny." Bjorn finished the sentence. Thorson stumbled out of his chair, clutching his sides from laughter. Adet, who was sitting next to him, kicked him lightly. Ebonheim could feel her face flush in embarrassment. She tried to keep her composure as she glared down at Thorson. Weak. She'll show him weak. She was still looking for an ability that could cause baldness. And her potential target was rapidly switching to Thorson. Now, none of us here really know exactly how powerful a god is supposed to be. Ionis is the only one among us who has witnessed two gods battling each other in personal combat. I'm not suggesting that you should demonstrate your strength to ease the worries of others, but you need to lift, Bjorn interjected. Logs. Bjorn, please, said Corinna, who was sitting to his left. You're asking too much of a child. She approached Ebonheim from behind, embraced her, and patted her head. Do you think her slender arms and soft hands could lift logs as well as you can? Don't be so unreasonable. But she is a goddess though, Sven said as he sipped on his morning mead. Shouldn't she be naturally strong despite her appearance? Several of the elders shrugged. In any case, Engin said, you don't need to pay it much mind. I'm sure we'll witness your true power and strength in the years to come. Ebonheim sighed, rubbing her thumbs against her temple. She recalled the starting abilities she picked so far. Active abilities: Ailment Cleansing Pulse, Divine Cantrip, Element Resisting Aura, Vines of the Bramble King, Fecundity of Creation, Pest Repelling Prana. None of the abilities she picked were flashy or destructive. The first one healed people. The second one did minor things. The third could help her survive hostile elemental conditions. The fourth could immobilize someone, but it wasn't necessarily all that good. The fifth was to help with harvests, and the last only created barriers against pets and vermins. She had nothing to help her in combat aside from Entangle, and Hilda had a stronger version. The only way she could get stronger is to either increase her divine rank or acquire more abilities using her quintessence. Quintessence 1998 8,000ths. She's saved up a lot by completing all of her quests every day as well as getting her monthly quintessence from the villagers. It would pain her to use those precious points gifted to her by her people, but spending them to make herself stronger would help the village in the long run. But a message from the Akashic system popped into Ebonheim's view. Special quest: convince the villagers of your great power by displaying a feat of strength. Completion reward: 100 quintessence, a slight increase to the villagers' devotion rank. No, Ebonheim said boldly as she stood up from her seat. A firm determination burned in her eyes. It's my fault for appearing to be weak. People are right to be skeptical of my strength. Are you sure? Engin asked. Ebonheim nodded and excused herself from Corinna's embrace. She approached Thorson, who was still lying on the floor, chuckling. She loomed over him, arms folded across her chest. Thorson. Thorson blinked, wiping a tear off one eye. Huh? She grinned. Get up. I challenge you to a sparring match. 20. Chapter 8, How to Train Your Goddess, Part 1. Beyond the outskirts of the settlement, nestled within the verdant embrace of the forest, lay a clearing that had become a training ground for the aspiring warriors of the village. It was here, among the dappled shadows and the whispers of the leaves, that young men and women honed their skills in the art of combat. The training ground was a natural amphitheater, its grassy floor framed by the towering oaks and elms that had stood sentinel for centuries. A gentle slope encircled the clearing, providing a vantage point for spectators to observe the clash of steel and the grunts of exertion that echoed through the trees. Scattered about the training ground were a variety of wooden dummies and straw-filled targets, each bearing the marks of countless practice blows. The soft thud of wooden swords striking their stationary opponents filled the air, punctuated by the occasional sharp clang of metal as a more experienced warrior tested the weight and balance of a newly forged blade. Cobbled paths led from the village to the training ground, winding through the forest like veins of stone. A small stream, fed by a bubbling spring hidden deep within the forest, meandered along the edge of the clearing. The crystalline waters provided a source of refreshment for the weary combatants, their faces flushed and dripping with sweat as they paused between bouts to slake their thirst. The scent of damp earth, moss, and the sharp tang of crushed ferns permeated the air, a constant reminder of the living forest that surrounded the training ground. Dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting a kaleidoscope of light and shadow across the grassy expanse, the sun's rays seemingly lending their energy to the aspiring warriors as they honed their craft. Ebonheim stood at the center of the clearing, holding her wooden sword aloft, and Thorson stood across from her, his own wooden sword in hand. She watched as he moved his weapon from a defensive position into an attacking pose and then back again. A few warriors who were training earlier had begun to gather around them, watching the sparring match. They all wore the same leather armor over chainmail shirts, and their weapons of choice were short swords or spears. Bjorn stood by Hilda, who was sitting down on the ground, knitting a scarf as she watched the match. Thorson took a few steps forward, keeping his wooden sword at an angle, and Ebonheim stepped back, her wooden sword held straight up in front of her. Thorson lunged forward with his weapon, and Ebonheim held out her hand to signal him to stop. "Wait," she called out. Thorson stopped and waited for Ebonheim to say something, but she didn't. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "I need to get ready first, just so that I'm at full power," Ebonheim answered. Thorson quirked an eyebrow and looked between Ebonheim and their audience before shrugging and walking back to his starting position. Ebonheim grinned from ear to ear. Thorson must be thinking that she was an easy win, but little did he know that Ebonheim came prepared with a few tricks and a plan of attack. Trick number 1, know your enemy. She spent a little of her quintessence to increase the rank of her divine sight. Now it enabled her to get a glimpse of his attributes. Her eyes glowed as she used her divine sight at Thorson. The Akashic system displayed his information in her peripheral while she kept track of her own. Divine sight, rank 2, activated. Essence, 190, greater than 185. Ebonheim's attributes, intelligence: 17, perception: 23, resilience: 21, strength: 12, agility: 26. Endurance: 17, charisma: 28, manipulation: 10, wit: 14, health: 190, essence: 190. Thorson's attributes: intelligence: 18, perception: 21, resilience: 23, strength: 27, agility: 18, endurance: 25, charisma: 19. Manipulation: 11, wit: 15, health: 300, 240 base, 60 from profession. Ebonheim's sword fell out of her grasp, and she stared wide-eyed at the screen. That big, dumb oaf was smarter and wittier than her? How was this possible? There's no way. The system must be broken. She rubbed her eyes and stared at the screen again. Nothing changed. She turned her head slowly to look over at Bjorn and Hilda. She had a sinking feeling that comparing herself to them would only crush her pride even more. Bjorn's attributes: intelligence: 19, perception: 23, resilience: 24, strength: 26, agility: 19, endurance: 25, charisma: 22, manipulation: 16, wit: 19, health: 305, 245 base, 60 from profession. Hilda's attributes: intelligence: 24, perception: 28, resilience: 26, strength: 12, agility: 12, endurance: 19, charisma: 25, manipulation: 18, wit: 28, health: 225, mana: 370, 250 base, 120 from profession. Sweat started to drip off her forehead as she took in the information. She was a goddess, right? The system said that she was. Did all gods start their lives this week? She looked back over at Thorson, standing idle, just staring at her like a parent watching over a confused child. Ebonheim reached down to pick up her sword and new information popped into view. Ebonheim combat stats: weapon, wooden sword, melee attack, 19, 19 base, no modifier, weapon damage, 4, block, 24, 24 base, no modifier, physical defense, 21. Skill, no applicable skill found. Thorson combat stats: weapon, wooden sword, melee attack, 34, 22 base, 12 modifier, weapon damage, 4, block, 31, 19 base, 12 modifier, physical defense, 30. Skill, melee proficiency, sword, expert rank, plus 12 modifier. She wasn't sure how big the gap was when she compared herself to Thorson, but judging by how much being an expert swordsman increased Thorson's numbers, every point of difference seemed to matter a great deal if compared to her being unskilled. You can spend 50 quintessence to attain skill melee proficiency, sword, apprentice rank, You can spend an additional 50 quintessence to attain skill melee proficiency, sword, novice rank. Skills can be acquired up to novice rank using this method. Would you like to spend a total of 100 quintessence to learn the skill melee proficiency, sword, novice rank? Yes. Quintessence, 1948. Greater than 1848. Acquired skill, melee proficiency sword. Apprentice rank, +2 modifier. Skill upgrade, melee proficiency, sword, novice rank, +4 modifier. Ebonheim combat stats. Weapon, wooden sword, melee attack, 23, 19 base, 4 modifier. Weapon damage, 4, block, 28, 24 base, 4 modifier. Physical defense, 21. Skill, melee proficiency, sword. Apprentice rank, +4 modifier. Whispers of information fluttered at the edges of her mind, forming a torrent of knowledge that threatened to overwhelm her. Information about swordsmanship came rushing in, stances, techniques, footwork, and more. She was inundated with it all, but she focused on absorbing and understanding the basics, letting the advanced techniques flow past her. Ebonheim opened her eyes and took a deep breath. She could feel the knowledge settling within her, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. It was time to put it into practice. Taking up a beginner's stance, she raised her sword and began to practice the basic cuts, her movements initially clumsy and uncertain. As she repeated the motions, however, her movements began to grow smoother, her confidence increasing with each passing minute. Her footwork improved, and her sword strokes became more deliberate and precise. Ebonheim was no longer simply swinging the sword, she was wielding it, guided by the newfound knowledge from the Akashic system. The gap got a little smaller. Maybe this could be a competitive match after all. Ebonheim took a deep breath, then held her sword out towards Thorson. I'm ready now. All right, Ebonheim, Thorson said with a smile. I'll let you initiate the attack this time. She nodded, then took another deep breath and charged at him, swinging her sword. He stepped forward to block the attack, his own sword rising up to meet hers. They clashed together, and they both staggered back slightly. She backed away, looking for an opening, but he wasn't making it easy. They traded blows, each one parrying the other's attack and countering as well. The spectators cheered loudly. It seemed that everyone enjoyed seeing two good fighters competing against each other. Thorson swung his sword downward, aiming for her chest. She blocked the blow with her wooden sword and countered with a slash for his legs. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding getting cut. Ebonheim feigned left, then turned right and slashed at his side. Thorson immediately countered with a stab for her torso. Ebonheim deflected the attack with her wooden sword. She dodged the next swing, but Thorson followed up quickly with a chop for her neck. Again she managed to deflect it. Ebonheim dodged the next swing, and Thorson threw himself back to avoid being struck. This pattern continued for several minutes, neither of them giving ground. This isn't working, Ebonheim muttered. I'm not making any progress. She looked over at the crowd and saw that they were still cheering. They seemed to be enjoying the fight as well. Ebonheim looked over at Thorson and smiled brightly. I think I have a plan. Thorson raised an eyebrow. He grinned back at her and nodded. And what might that be? She grinned, her eyes glowing with power as she raised her free hand upwards. Divine ability, entangle, rank I, activated. Essence, 185, greater than 160. Vines sprouted from the ground beneath Thorson's feet, wrapping around his legs and pulling him down. More vines crawled out from under his body and wrapped themselves tightly around his arms. His sword fell out of his grip as he struggled against the ropes binding him. Ebonheim laughed. I've got you now. She lunged forward, slashing downwards with her wooden blade. Thorson managed to rise to his feet to meet the oncoming blow. The Akashic system displayed a message in red just as Ebonheim's sword connected with Thorson's chest. Thorson activated Barbarian ability, Wild Heart Defiance. He receives +5 arcane defense, +5 physical defense, 5 damage reduction, physical, and 30 temporary health. Her blow connected but bounced harmlessly off his chest. Ebonheim watched in disbelief as Thorson shook his head and grinned. You better come up with better tricks if you plan on winning, Thorson said as he grabbed his sword off the ground and started hacking at the vines constricting him. Vine health, 25, greater than 12. That much damage with a wooden sword? Ebonheim jumped back and took a defensive stance. Alright, trick number 2 didn't work as well as she hoped. It was probably of no use trying to keep Thorson entangled if she couldn't inflict any damage on him. She needed to acquire a more offensive ability to break through his defenses. The Akashic system started listing abilities, one after the other. All of their names sounded great and powerful but barely gave any hint about what each would do. There must be something else here that would help her win. Something that would give her the advantage over Thorson. Ebonheim looked over and saw Thorson continue to cut away at the vines with his wooden sword. Vine health, 12, greater than 0. As soon as the vine hit the critical threshold, it began to wither and die. Thorson ripped the rest of the vines off his body and stood up straight. Ugh, damn it. She lunged at him with a series of slashes. His response was swift. He leapt backward and brought his weapon down hard on top of her wooden sword. Her blade shattered instantly under the force of his strike, sending splinters flying everywhere. Her eyes widened in shock as she watched her precious sword fall apart. As she stared dumbfounded at her broken sword, Thorson tapped Ebonheim's head with the tip of his wooden blade. "Looks like it's my win, this day," he said. Thorson walked over to Bjorn and Hilda as the other onlookers applauded. One lanky warrior at the back of the small crowd heckled Thorson. "Boo. You're a bully, Thorson. You should have let her win." "Bully. Hey, shut your trap, Titus," Thorson barked. "You'll be sparring me next." "What did you make of her skills?" Bjorn asked. Thorson rubbed his neck and chuckled. "Her swordsmanship was on par with a novice, at best. I honestly didn't expect her to be that skilled. But her agility and awareness during our exchanges show a lot of talent and potential. That was the only reason why the match lasted that long. You were also taking it easy on her since the beginning. Though, you didn't have to use the wild heart, you know," Bjorn said. "Her blow wouldn't have produced much force with her small frame." "Aye, quite right. But she was keen enough with her attack that it would have left quite a bruise on me if I hadn't done that," he chuckled. Ebonheim finally approached the trio and tossed her broken sword by Thorson. "You broke it. So you have to make a new one?" "I've not the skill to make a passable wooden sword, so I'll have someone else make it." Bjorn approached her and ruffled her hair. "Don't be too upset. You had your chance and lost fair and square." Ebonheim frowned. "It doesn't feel that way." "Well, you could always try again later," Bjorn offered. "Maybe you'll get lucky next time." "Do you think I'll be better if I use a different weapon?" she asked. Bjorn and Thorson pondered. Hilda spoke first. "Why don't you try your hand on a bow?" Ebonheim blinked. "I can use a bow against him?" Thorson flicked at Ebonheim's nose lightly. "That's not how people spar around these parts, you hear? It'd be a proper duel at that point." They all burst into laughter. "I think Hilda is right," Bjorn said. "With your fleet of foot, your keen awareness, and your grace, you'd make a great archer." "Should we commission a Fletcher to make her a bow?" Thorson asked. "No need for that," Hilda said as she stood up with the help of her cane. "Our goddess can create one for herself." "I can?" Ebonheim asked. "You don't know?" Bjorn asked her. "Gods are not omniscient. History has proven that, time and time again," Hilda said as she placed a hand on Ebonheim's shoulder. "She is young when compared to her peers." Hilda walked steadily to the center of the training ground before turning back to look at Ebonheim. "Now then, Goddess Ebonheim, today's training is not yet finished. I have felt your affinity with nature ever since our first encounter. If you wouldn't mind letting this old druid teach you some things." Ebonheim nodded eagerly and approached her. She has already witnessed firsthand just how powerful Hilda was when she slew those frog-like creatures with ease. Maybe she could pick her powers to mimic what Hilda could do. 19. Chapter 9, How to Train Your Goddess, Part 2. Ebonheim followed Hilda to the eastern edge of the village where the Jaxisha tribe had settled. From there, Hilda led her along a winding path that snaked its way through the trees, the scent of damp earth and the whispers of the forest enveloping them. As they walked, Ebonheim could feel the presence of countless tiny spirits that resided within the woods, watching them intently yet without malice. Finally, Hilda guided Ebonheim into a hidden grove surrounded by a natural cathedral of ancient trees. Their intertwined branches formed a canopy overhead, allowing dappled sunlight to filter through the leaves, creating an ethereal atmosphere. A carpet of soft moss covered the ground, and a small, crystal-clear stream bubbled nearby, its gentle murmurs adding to the grove's tranquility. Hilda sat down on the moss, facing Ebonheim. Ebonheim sat across from her, mimicking her posture. "It's nice to finally get a chance to talk with you in private," Hilda said with a warm smile. "You've been quite busy this past month." Ebonheim grinned cheekily. Well, it's the least I could do as your goddess. I had to make up for that awful first impression by racking up some good deeds and helping out around here. Besides, I really wanted to get to know everyone better, so it's been a lot of fun. Hilda chuckled. You're quite the honest one. Everyone has enjoyed having you here. You're quite popular with the younger children, and many of the older women want you to come over for tea. Ebonheim sniffled and wiped away a stray tear. This was it. This was what she craved all along. Just a gesture or a word of appreciation, and maybe a little bit of quintessence once in a while. Thank you. I like tea, I must say, Hilda said as she looked at her with a curious expression. You feel a little different from the gods I've encountered. Ebonheim blinked. Eh? What do you mean? You still think I'm not a deity? Hilda shook her head. No, that much is clear. It's just that your demeanor is so unlike what one would expect from a god. Can you give me an example? Ebonheim asked. Personally, I've only met with 2 other gods besides you. The first one called himself Older. He came to our tribe when I was a bit younger and wanted to establish himself as a god for our tribe. We politely declined his request and he made a show of force to let us know his displeasure, but he left without incident. What an asshole he was. And he had an overbearing presence that matched his imposing form. What did he look like? He had an androgynous humanoid form, 2 meters tall, 4 arms, and a face devoid of features except for one eye that looked like a pool of silver. Ooh. Ebonheim tried to imagine herself looking similar to that and shivered at the thought. The other god I encountered was much more recent. He went by the name Breville and ruled over the city of Metosia, which was a close neighbor to our tribe. Our encounter with him, Hilda pinched the bridge of her nose and shook her head, was more confrontational. Rather than forcing us to come under his rule, his only intent was to wage war against us for the sake of bloodshed. When we asked why he was so bent on his aggression, he merely replied that he wanted to test his new powers to further awe his worshippers. Trying to reason with him fared no better than reasoning with a deranged beast. I see. Ebonheim sighed. So I can't blame the villagers for their distrust. Well, not all gods are like the 2 I've mentioned. Others have told me that other gods could be just as cordial and kind as you, but they all still seem distant to those that revere them and rarely show their physical forms to walk among us at leisure, or, that's a shame. Having an actual body to move around and experience the world with feels so great. That's what makes you quite peculiar, Hilda said. You move and act just like a normal human would. If it wasn't for your hair and eyes, anyone would have mistaken you for just another villager. You even get fatigued and hungry. Why is that, eh? Don't people with bodies get tired and hungry? Not for gods, as far as I recall. They may take on a physical form, but there's never been a record of one resting. Some partake in consumption, but only as a recreational activity, not for any need of nourishment. Oh, wow, that's interesting, Ebonheim said, her mind racing to find an explanation for the discrepancies. The Akashic system didn't mention anything about needing to eat and sleep while she was manifested, so she figured it was just the way things were. Yet you get tired? Hilda asked. Every day. And hungry? 3 times a day. Thirsty? Do you have some tea? Ebonheim asked. Hilda chuckled. After your training. Right. You're going to train me, so let's get started. Ebonheim leaned forward, eyes full of eagerness. I suppose that's enough for idle talk, Hilda said. Very well. Are you going to teach me about the magic that you use? Ebonheim asked. No. Learning druidry from me won't benefit you. Eh? Why not? You said we both had an affinity for nature. That's right, I said that. But that doesn't mean you're able to learn druidry. Ebonheim frowned. Why not? Hilda chuckled. Because it would be like a child teaching a fish how to swim. Ebonheim furrowed her brow and her eyes squinted as she tried to make sense of what she just heard. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she was about to say something, but then closed again. Am I the child? She asked. No, I'm the child in this example. Eh? What? I don't get it. Hilda looked up at the canopy and smiled. Druidry is a deep connection with nature, a bond that allows us to harness its power and commune with the spirits of the earth. It is a discipline that takes years, even decades, to master. However, Ebonheim, I must tell you something. Hilda paused, her gaze meeting hers with a mixture of reverence and regret. You, as a divine being, are already more attuned to the natural world and the source of magic itself than any druid could ever hope to be. Ebonheim looked puzzled. So I can't learn any magic from people? Hilda smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You are already a divine embodiment of the natural world, Ebonheim. Your connection to the land and its magic is beyond what any mortal can comprehend. Druidry is a way for mortals to forge a connection to the natural world, but you, as a goddess, already possess that bond. Ebonheim crossed her arms and pouted, still unconvinced. The way you entangled those creatures was still better than what I did though. Hilda chuckled. I'm sure it won't take much time for you to surpass my abilities. Ha ha. Yeah, probably not. Ebonheim nodded confidently. It'll be fine. Hilda laughed softly and stroked Ebonheim's hair. Although you cannot learn druidry as we mortals do, I can teach you how to make some practical use of your powers. I mentioned earlier that you do well using a bow. Would you like to learn how to make one? Ebonheim's face lit up, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Yeah, let's make one. Hilda nodded, then picked up her wooden walking cane. The gnarled, twisted wood seemed to come alive in her hands, pulsing with energy. Watch carefully, she instructed. While I can't teach you druidry directly, if you observe what I do and understand its principles, then you can find the path that will lead you to the same outcome. Ebonheim's gaze followed the old druid's movements with rapt attention. Hilda closed her eyes and began to whisper softly, her voice blending with the rustle of leaves above. As she spoke, the wooden cane began to transform before their very eyes. The gnarled wood straightened, knots and imperfections disappearing as if they had never existed. The cane elongated, its bark smoothing to reveal a lustrous surface beneath. Hilda's hands moved gently along the wood, guiding its transformation with the precision of a master craftsman. Finally, the once crooked cane had become a perfectly balanced bow, its curves and bends a testament to the harmony of nature and the skill of its creator. Hilda opened her eyes, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. You can shape wood and other natural materials to your will, creating tools that are both beautiful and functional. Ebonheim marveled at the bow in Hilda's hands, her mind racing with the possibilities that lay before her. But how does it work, Hilda? How does one use a bow? Hilda chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. A bow is a simple yet elegant weapon. It relies on the tension of the wood and the string to propel an arrow with great force and accuracy. She gestured for Ebonheim to come closer, then carefully explained the different parts of the bow, from the upper and lower limbs to the nocking point on the string. The key to a well-crafted bow, Hilda said, is the balance between flexibility and strength. The wood must bend easily, but it must also be strong enough to withstand the tremendous forces at play when the bow is drawn. Ebonheim nodded, her eyes following Hilda's hands as she demonstrated the proper technique for drawing the bow. Now, Ebonheim, Hilda said, I want you to try it for yourself. I'm sure you can find the power within yourself to shape nature to your will. Once you do, find a piece of wood, and I can guide you in shaping it into a bow. Ebonheim closed her eyes and the Akashic Systems interface revealed itself in her mind. Searching for relevant ability. Name, Verdant Craftsmanship, Rank I. Effect. This spell allows you to shape wood from trees to craft items, such as tools or weapons. The wood can be twisted and shaped with precision, allowing the druid to create intricate designs and patterns. The resulting items are imbued with essence, making them stronger and more durable than their mundane counterparts. Range, touch, target, single tree, or wooden material. Duration. The effects of the spell last for 24 hours, after which the wood reverts back to its original form. Cost, 20 essence. Verdant Craftsmanship, Rank I, will cost 100 quintessence to acquire. Perfect. She'll take it. Verdant Craftsmanship, Rank I, acquired. Quintessence, 1848, greater than 1748. Knowledge of the abilities used streamed to her mind. Now she just needed to find a tree to use. Ebonheim eagerly set off into the forest, her eyes scanning the trees and underbrush for a suitable piece of wood. Her eyes widened as she suddenly came up with an idea. Ebonheim rushed back to her hut and grabbed a long, thin log of ebon tree that Thorson had cut for her. She returned to Hilda with the piece at hand. Hilda examined the log and nodded in approval. Oh my, I never thought of using the ebon tree for the material. Yes, this will do nicely. Now, let's begin. Ebonheim stood before the log, Her eyes closed as she focused on using her new power. She reached out with her senses, feeling the essence within her converge to her hands. Verdant craftsmanship, rank I, activated. Essence, 190, greater than 170. Slowly, she began to channel that energy into the branch, guiding its transformation just as Hilda had done with her cane. Hidden quest completed. Learn skill craft, bow from an elder. Reward, acquired skill, craft, bow. Intermediate rank, +8 modifier. The wood seemed to respond to her touch, bending and shifting to her will. Under Hilda's watchful eye, Ebonheim carefully shaped the part of the log into a bow, its graceful curves mirroring the natural beauty of the forest around them. When she was finished, she opened her eyes and looked at her creation with wonder. Well done, Ebonheim, Hilda praised, her voice filled with warmth and pride. You have crafted a fine bow, one that any archer would be proud to wield. Ebonheim smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and accomplishment. But what was that about completing a hidden quest? And she got a great skill from it? Wait, did that mean she could have learned swordsmanship from Thorson or Bjorn without spending quintessence to get it? Son of a. Now, Hilda said, now, let's move on to the next step, stringing the bow. Following Hilda's guidance, Ebonheim carefully stripped the fibers from the remaining log and twisted them together, creating a sturdy yet supple cord. She then tied the cord to one end of the bow stave, stringing it with a practiced ease that belied her inexperience. Verdant crafting complete. Weapon, ebon bow, ranged attack, 24, weapon damage, 10, damage type, kinetic, piercing, special properties, ignores 10 damage reduction. Skill, no applicable skill found. With the bow now strung, Hilda turned her attention to the crafting of arrows. She demonstrated the process of selecting and preparing the necessary materials, wooden shafts, arrowheads, and feathers for fletching. You can spend time crafting your own arrows another time, using the ebon tree as material perhaps, but for now you can use the ones I've prepared, Hilda said as she grabbed a quiver of arrows for them to use. Hilda led Ebonheim to a small archery range. She demonstrated the proper stance, grip, and technique for using a bow, emphasizing the importance of a steady hand and a keen eye. Ebonheim listened carefully, her body naturally falling into the correct stance as she practiced her draw. With each motion, she felt a growing sense of power and control. Yes, that's it. You're learning well, Hilda said before handing her an arrow. Try and hit the target now. Ebonheim knocked the arrow, her fingers finding the knocking point with ease. Drawing the bowstring back, she felt the power stored within the stave, the tension that would propel the arrow toward its target, and then, with a deep breath, she released the arrow. The arrow flew through the air, striking the target with a satisfying thud. Ebonheim stared at her handiwork, her heart pounding with exhilaration and pride. Hidden quest completed. Learn skill ranged proficiency, bow from an elder. Reward, acquired skill, ranged proficiency, bow, novice rank, +4 modifier. Weapon, ebon bow, ranged attack, 28, 24 base, 4 modifier. Weapon damage, 8, damage type, kinetic, piercing, special properties, ignores 10 damage reduction. Skill, ranged proficiency, bow, novice rank, +4 modifier. Hilda chuckled, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're a natural at learning new things, as expected of our great goddess. Ebonheim's eyes started tearing up and she embraced Hilda in a big hug. Hilda, thank you. Thank you. 18. Chapter 10, Darkness at the Mines, Part 1, 12th Day of Scarletide, 1366. Beneath the earth, the mine spread out like the dark veins of a slumbering giant. Torchlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as the miners chipped away at the rock face with rhythmic precision in search of the rich veins of iron and copper. Their hammers and pickaxes rang out against the stone. Sweat dripped from their brows, their muscles strained with exertion, and their breaths came in ragged gasps as they labored. A lithe figure stood apart from the group, a shadow against the flickering torchlight. Lyra, a druid from the Jaxishan tribe tasked with protecting and assisting the miners in their perilous work. She was tall and slender, her deep green cloak shimmering with a life of its own, seemingly woven from the very leaves and vines that she commanded. Her eyes, the color of stormy skies, scanned the darkness, vigilant for any dangers that might lurk within the mine's depths. Oi, Lyra! A miner bellowed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I thought druids were supposed to be one with nature." "You're not scared of the dark, are ya?" Lyra offered the grizzled miner a wry smile. "Fear not, friend. The dark and I are well acquainted. I am here to safeguard you all from the dangers that may hide in these shadows." A nearby miner, his face streaked with soot, chimed in. "Aye, and we're grateful for it. I'd rather have a druid with us than face whatever nasties might be lurking down here by ourselves." Lyra leaned against a timber support, her keen eyes watching as the miners hewed the rock face with determined vigor. A burly miner named Tan, his beard matted with sweat and dirt, sidled up beside her. He grinned, his teeth stained from chewing the leaves of a local herb. "You know, Lyra," he began, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I've been thinking, you druids can command plants and have powers over the earth and such. Why not just grow us a tunnel straight to the ore?" Lyra's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Tan, there's more to the earth than just bending it to our will. We druids respect the balance of nature. Besides, if we did all the work for you, you'd miss out on the joys of hard labor." "Oh, I do love me some hard labor," Tan snickered. "Nah, truthfully I do enjoy the work. Some folk are just meant for mining. It's my calling." "I'm hearing the mine calling you to get back to work," another miner further into the tunnel shouted. Laughter erupted among the miners. Lyra smiled. She had always admired their resilience, their ability to find camaraderie and laughter even in the most arduous of conditions. Tan did have a point. Unfortunately neither Lyra nor any of the other druids, including Grandmother Hilda, had the power to rend apart the earth to such a degree. Maybe someone who has ascended into an archdruid could, but none in her tribe's history has managed to attain it. "Hey, Lyra," one of the older miners called out, taking a momentary break from his labor. "I heard that druids can talk to animals. Is it true?" Lyra smiled, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Indeed, it is true. We are able to commune with the creatures of the earth, to listen to their thoughts and share our own." The miner raised an eyebrow, his weathered face creased with interest. "So, have you ever asked a squirrel what it thinks about when it's scurrying up a tree?" Lyra chuckled, shaking her head. "I have not, though I imagine their thoughts are largely focused on the task at hand and the location of their next meal." A younger miner, her face flushed from exertion, chimed in. "What about birds? Can you talk to them too?" "I've always wondered what it would be like to fly." Lyra nodded, her expression growing thoughtful. "Yes, I have spoken to birds, and their experience of flight is both exhilarating and humbling. They see the world from a perspective that few of us can even imagine, and yet they do not take it for granted." Another miner wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes alight with curiosity. "So, if you can talk to animals, do you ever, ask them for favors? Like, have a squirrel fetch you a nut or something?" Laughter rippled through the group, the sound echoing through the dimly lit cavern. Lyra grinned, her eyes dancing with mirth. "I must admit, I have never requested such a favor. My relationship with the creatures of the earth is one of mutual respect and understanding. We aid one another when needed, but we do not exploit each other's abilities for our own gain." The grizzled miner who had started the conversation scratched his beard, his gaze fixed on Lyra. "Well, if you ever change your mind, I reckon a squirrel would be mighty helpful at fetching tools from the surface." A burst of laughter filled the mine, the sound warm and infectious. Even Lyra could not suppress a chuckle at the thought, her eyes crinkling with amusement. The conversation carried on, a symphony of banter and laughter that resonated through the mine. Lyra watched the men and women at work, their camaraderie and determination evident as they heaved their tools against the stubborn rock. "Say, Lyra," a young miner inquired as he wiped sweat from his brow, "what's the worst thing you've ever seen down here?" The druid pursed her lips, considering the question. "Well, there was a time when a group of miners unearthed a nest of cave spiders. Their venom was potent, but we managed to drive them back and ensure the safety of the miners." A shudder rippled through the workers, their imaginations conjuring visions of monstrous spiders with fangs that dripped venom. Another miner, his voice wavering slightly, chimed in. "We're lucky to have you here with us, Lyra. Don't know what we'd do without you." Lyra nodded, her gaze once more scanning the darkness. "I'm here to serve and protect. As long as we don't disturb any spider nests, this week should end rather uneventfully." As the miners continued to work, The easy banter persisted. The mine rang with the sounds of laughter and the striking of metal against stone. Lyra remained vigilant, her senses attuned to the slightest shift in the air or tremor in the earth. Ebonheim sat on a moss-covered rock close to the archery range, her legs swinging back and forth as she hummed a cheerful tune. Her fingers danced over the screen that appeared before her. New abilities list: Enchanted Essence Bolt, Forest's Call, Tempest of the Grove, Blazing Essence Bolt, Arboreal Stride. She couldn't help but giggle as she saw the names of her newly acquired abilities. The thought of the devastation and awe she could now wield with just a flick of her wrist excited her, especially considering her impending rematch with Thorson. Name: Enchanted Essence Bolt. Effect: shoots an arrow made of essence that deals 20 divine damage to the target. Bypasses 10 damage reduction. Deals double damage against dark and corrupted creatures. Range: 50 meters. Target: single target. Duration: 5 charges. Cost: 15 essence. Requirement: Ebon Bow equipped. Enchanted Essence Bolt. Huh? She said, her eyes twinkling with mischief as she imagined the powerful, shimmering arrow piercing through a target. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. Her laughter echoed through the forest, the spirits of the trees and plants seeming to join in her amusement. As she continued to peruse the list of her new abilities, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation bubbling within her. Name: Forest's Call. Effect: awakens 2 trees within range, imbuing the tree with divine power, causing it to come alive and aid the caster in combat. Range: 20 meters. Target: 2 trees. Duration: 5 minutes or until cancelled. Cost: 25 essence. Forest's Call, she read aloud, her voice filled with glee as she pictured the trees themselves rising up to aid her in battle. Oh, Thorson won't know what hit him when I show off this little trick. She snickered as she pictured Thorson desperately trying to fend off the animated trees that would come to her aid, a look of confusion and disbelief on his face as he realized he was no match for her divine powers. Her competitive nature and the memory of her previous defeat at the hands of the veteran warrior fueled her enthusiasm as she continued to read through her new powers. The thought of facing Thorson again, this time armed with her newfound powers, filled her with delight. Name: Tempest of the Grove. Effect: creates a massive cyclone that envelops the target, dealing 15 continuous damage every 5 seconds and reduces the target's movement speed in half. The target suffers a -5 attack, -5 defense, -10 evasion for the duration of the effect. 15% chance to immobilize target for 2 seconds. Can occur once every 5 seconds. Range: 30 meters. Target: single target. Duration: 1 minute or until cancelled. Cost: 25 essence. Tempest of the Grove, she said, her eyes widening as she imagined a massive cyclone of wind and foliage tearing through the battlefield, restraining her opponent. Oh, this is just too good. I can't wait to see the look on his face when I unleash this one. Her laughter rang out once more, accompanied by the rustling of leaves and the whispers of the spirits that seemed to share her amusement. As she scrolled further down the list of her powers, her excitement only grew. Name: Blazing Essence Bolt. Effect: shoots an arrow of essence that deals 100 divine and fire damage to the target. Bypasses 20 damage reduction. Has a 20% chance of instantly destroying dark and corrupted creatures. Range: 100 meters. Target: single target. Duration: instantaneous. Cost: 50 essence. Requirement: Ebon Bow equipped. Can only be used when the caster is below 30% health. Ebonheim paused for a moment, her eyes widening as she read the description of her next ability. Blazing Essence Bolt, she murmured, her voice trembling with anticipation. This is it. This is my secret weapon. If I'm ever in a bind again like that time with the Kungwen, I can finish them off with this power. Her laughter rang through the forest once more, the spirits of the trees and plants joining in her mirth. Name: Arboreal Stride. Effect: allows you to quickly travel between trees, entering one tree and emerging from another tree of the same kind up to 100 meters away. The trees must be living and large enough to accommodate your size. You instantly know the location of all other trees of the same kind within 100 meters and can pass into one of those trees or step out of the tree you are in. Range: 100 meters. Target: self. Duration: concentration, up to 2 minutes. Cost: 20 essence. And finally, Arboreal Stride, she said, her tone a mixture of pride and excitement. "Not only will I be able to strike him down, but I'll also be able to vanish into a tree and reappear elsewhere like a true goddess of the forest." She had to spend a decent amount of quintessence to get all of them. 600 was no small amount. Fortunately, she was diligent in performing her daily quests these past 2 months, so at least she was steadily gaining more beyond her monthly stipend from the villagers' devotion. Quintessence 3708 thousandths. As she closed the Akashic system interface, a grin spread across her face. The prospect of testing her new powers on the archery range was simply too tempting to resist. With her bow in hand, Ebonheim strode confidently toward the target she had set up earlier. She could already picture the look on Thorsten's face when she finally got her chance to face him again, and she couldn't help but giggle at the thought. As the hours wore on, the air grew colder and the torchlight seemed to dim ever so slightly. Lyra furrowed her brow, her instincts prickling with unease. She knew that something was amiss, though she couldn't yet pinpoint the source. The encroaching darkness was unnatural. A sudden, chilling scream tore through the mine, a sound of primal terror that struck the hearts of all who heard it. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw a miner collapse, his face contorted in fear and agony, an inky black tendril wrapped tightly around his arm. From the darkness emerged a creature of nightmares, a hulking, twisted mass of corruption and malevolence. Its form was ever-shifting, a swirling mass of shadow and tarry blackness that defied description. Its very presence seemed to sap the warmth from the air, casting an oppressive chill over the cavern. The torchlight dimmed to the paltry glow of candlelight in its presence. Lyra sprang into action, her voice rising in an ancient chant that sent tendrils of green energy spiraling from her fingertips. The vines and roots that had lain dormant within the earth surged to life, wrapping themselves around the monster's limbs and holding it fast and allowing the ensnared miner to escape its clutches. "To me," she shouted, her voice ringing clear and commanding above the din. "Flee, and do not look back. I will hold it at bay." The miners, their faces etched with fear, needed no further encouragement. They dropped their tools and fled, their footfalls echoing through the caverns as they scrambled toward the surface. The aberration roared, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the earth. It strained against its bindings, the darkness within it seething and writhing as it fought to break free. Lyra stood her ground, her hands outstretched as she continued to channel the primal energy of the earth into her bindings. The monster's tendrils whipped through the air, seeking to ensnare her, but she deftly dodged their strikes, her movements fluid and graceful. With each passing moment, the creature's struggles grew more desperate and wild. It battered against the walls, sending showers of rock and debris raining down upon the cavern floor. The air filled with the dust and grit of its fury, making it difficult to breathe. As the last of the miners disappeared from sight, Lyra knew that she could not hold the creature forever. She glanced back at the entrance, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she must retreat. For now, Lyra sent a powerful blast of roots and vines surging through the cavern. They entwined the aberration, pinning it to the cavern walls, buying her precious seconds to flee. Her heart raced as she sprinted down the dark, twisted tunnels of the mine, the echoing roars of the monstrosity filling her ears. Her breaths were labored, and her legs ached from the exertion, but she knew she couldn't afford to slow down. The miners had managed to escape, and now it was her duty to ensure the creature wouldn't follow them. As she rounded a corner, Lyra skidded to a halt, her eyes quickly scanning the cavern before her. The walls were lined with thick, gnarled roots that had grown deep into the mine. She could sense the life force pulsing within them and knew they would be the key to her plan. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Lyra raised her hands and began to chant, her voice steady and strong as she called upon her druidic powers. The ancient words of power echoed through the cavern, the energy in the air crackling with anticipation. The roots shuddered, as if awakened by her command, and began to twist and grow, reaching out to form a thick, interwoven barrier across the cavern. As the wall of roots continued to grow and thicken, Lyra could feel her strength waning, but she refused to falter. Behind her, the aberration was closing in, its roars growing louder and more enraged. With each passing moment, Lyra knew she was running out of time. With a final, desperate push of her will, she sent a surge of energy into the roots, urging them to complete their task. The wall of roots closed in on itself, forming a solid, impenetrable barrier that sealed off the cavern. The creature's furious roars shook the mine as it collided with the barrier, its inky tentacles scraping and tearing at the roots in an attempt to break through. But Lyra's spell held strong, the roots reinforced by the very essence of the earth. Gasping for breath, Lyra allowed herself a moment to marvel at her handiwork. The aberration was trapped, at least for now, and the miners were safe. But she couldn't linger, not while the monstrosity still raged behind her. With a final glance at the barrier, Lyra turned and fled, her cloak billowing out behind her as she raced through the darkness. 17. Chapter 11, Darkness at the Mines, Part 2. The moment the miners saw the entrance of the mine, they scrambled towards the daylight, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and relief. Lyra followed close behind, her every muscle aching from the battle's exertion. As they crossed the threshold, the cool, crisp air washed over them like a soothing balm, bringing with it the promise of safety and reprieve from the darkness. The miners collapsed onto the ground, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and the adrenaline that still coursed through their veins. Lyra knelt beside them, her eyes filled with concern as she assessed their injuries and offered what aid she could. One of the miners, a stout man with a grizzled beard, looked up at Lyra, his eyes wide with disbelief. What in the name of Ebonheim was that thing, Lyra? Where did it come from? Lyra sighed, her brow furrowing as she considered the question. I'm not sure. It's some sort of aberration, but I've never seen anything like it before. Its presence here is troubling. I managed to seal it inside, but I'm not sure how long it will hold. The grizzled miner nodded, his expression grim. Lyra glanced around, noting how the miners had settled into various positions on the ground. Most were sitting, though the miner who was first attacked by the aberration lay flat on his back with his arms stretched out to the side. She moved over to him and crouched, placing her hand gently on his chest. His heart thudded under her palm, beating too quickly, like the wings of a frightened bird. Take a few minutes to catch your breath, Lyra said, offering the miner a kind smile. Then we'll head back to the village. The miner nodded and laid his head back against the ground. His breathing was labored, his lungs still working to recover from the stress of the escape. Lyra rose to her feet and turned to the other miners, her eyes searching their faces. She took note of the ones who needed to sit, and she gestured to the grassy area nearby. Please, gather round. The miners obeyed, moving to form a loose circle. Lyra knelt again beside the injured miner she had spoken to. He had not moved, and he still breathed deeply, the sound audible in the quiet evening air. Lyra placed her hands on either side of the miner's face and closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. She searched the surrounding area, seeking out the tiny flickers of life. There, she found the spirit of a single flower growing on the edge of the clearing. The flower's spirit whispered softly in her mind, telling her how to heal the miner. Lyra smiled as she concentrated on the task, allowing the flower to guide her efforts. She focused her magic on the miner, drawing the power into her body until she glowed with an inner light. When she opened her eyes, the miner's breathing had slowed, his chest rising and falling steadily. His color had improved, and the lines in his face had faded. Lyra released her connection with the flower and stood, smiling at the miner. You're all right now, she said, smiling. Are you ready to go? The miner nodded. Yes, thank you. Lyra held out her arm and the miner grasped her wrist, letting her help him to his feet. Deep within the mine, the aberration's twisted form writhed and convulsed, its eldritch essence coalescing and reforming, driven by an all-consuming, cyclopean hunger for annihilation. The abhorrent mass of quivering, putrescent tissue harbored a myriad of eyes, unblinking and glaring with an unspeakable maleficence. The chthonic creature's maw yawned wide, revealing a cacophony of jagged, adamantine fangs, each oozing with a loathsome, venomous ichor. Its innumerable tendrils, each tipped with sinister barbs, writhed and undulated like monstrous serpents from the forgotten depths of time, insatiably seeking new victims to ensnare within their loathsome embrace. With a creeping and inexorable dread, its umbral appendages scaled the rough-hewn walls of the mine, the darkness intensifying, growing ever more oppressive as it neared the world above. The very earth itself seemed to quiver with nameless terror, as if it shared the soul-shaking premonition of the unspeakable horrors that loomed, ready to be unleashed upon the world. Ebonheim stood at the edge of the archery range, her eyes gleaming with pride as she surveyed the target she had just struck with her enchanted essence bolt. The bolt had buried itself in the very center of the target, the wood around it still smoldering from the divine energy that had coursed through it. Oh, "Who's the goddess now?" she said, unable to hide the smug grin that spread across her face. "That's right, me. I've got this archery thing down." She twirled her bow in a dramatic flourish, her movements accompanied by the soft rustle of leaves. "Weapon, ebon bow, ranged attack, 32, 24 base, 8 modifier, weapon damage, 25, 20 damage, 5 modifier, damage type, divine, special properties, +5 weapon damage. Skill, ranged proficiency, bow, intermediate rank, +8 modifier." Over the past 2 months, Ebonheim had devoted herself to honing her skills and unlocking her divine potential, determined to prove herself and avenge her loss against Thorson. The memory of that embarrassing defeat still rankled her, but now, armed with her new powers and newfound confidence, she could hardly wait for the chance to even the score. "Just wait until Thorson sees me now," she said, her voice filled with glee as she imagined the look on her rival's face. "He won't know what hit him. I'll have him begging for mercy with my enchanted essence bolt, and then I'll just vanish into a tree with my arboreal stride like the mysterious, powerful goddess that I am." She couldn't help but giggle at the thought, her competitive nature driving her to seek payback for her previous defeat. Her eyes danced with mischief as she continued to imagine the scene that would unfold when she finally faced Thorson again. "I'll show him the true power of the forest with my forest's call," she said, waving her hands dramatically as she pictured the spirits of the forest rising up to aid her in battle. "And if he still doesn't get the message, I'll just hit him with a tempest of the grove. That'll teach him to mess with the goddess." Her laughter rang out through the clearing. The spirits of the forest seemed to share her amusement, their whispers echoing her laughter like a chorus of ethereal voices. "And if, by some miracle, he still manages to stand after all that," she continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "then I'll hit him with my blazing essence bolt. That should put him in his place once and for all." Her smile turned slightly wicked as she envisioned Thorson's defeat, her anticipation of the coming rematch only fueling her excitement. "But, of course," she said with a wink and a grin, "I'll go easy on him. After all, we don't want to hurt his fragile warrior ego too much, do we?" Ebonheim's laughter filled the forest once more, her newfound powers and skills giving her the confidence to face any challenge that came her way. Emergency quest: save the miners. Defeat the aberration at the mines. Quest duration: 10 minutes. Completion reward: 200 quintessence. Failure condition: Lyra dead. All miners dead. Suddenly, her brow furrowed, her senses picking up a note of discord, a subtle undercurrent of fear and anxiety that sent a shiver down her spine. She closed her eyes, focusing her senses, and heard the faint echoes of cries for help, the desperate pleas of the miners encountering danger northwest of the village. Without a moment's hesitation, Ebonheim rushed to the tree line, her heart pounding with dread, her gaze fixed on the distant forest that separated the village from the mine. Engine had told her that the journey there would take half a day on foot, but she couldn't afford to waste precious time when their lives were on the line. Arboreal stride activated. She stretched out her hand towards the nearest tree. The air around her shimmered, and a subtle breeze rustled the leaves above. Ebonheim felt her connection to the forest intensify. The towering oak seemed to beckon her, its bark pulsating with a newfound vitality. She approached it, her heart racing with anticipation, and without hesitation, she stepped into its embrace. The world around her vanished, replaced by a shadowy realm of twisted roots and gnarled branches, the realm of the trees. The verdant pathways hidden from mortal eyes, stretched out before her. Ebonheim moved with purpose, her lithe form gliding from tree to tree, her senses heightened by the urgency that thrummed within her veins. Each stride brought her closer to her destination. The trees whispered to her as she passed, their ancient voices guiding her through the labyrinthine network of their hidden world. The air within the realm was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of the forest floor and the murmur of unseen life. Ebonheim's pace quickened, her movements becoming a blur as she leapt from one tree to the next. Her breaths were measured and focused, each exhalation in sync with her steps. She could feel the distance closing between her and her destination. The shadows grew thinner, the darkness beginning to give way to the familiar hues of the forest beyond. Sensing the mine close by, Ebonheim braced herself, her hands gripping her bow in anticipation. With a final, powerful stride, she burst forth from the shadowy realm, emerging from the trunk of a massive tree. Lyra felt a sudden chill race down her spine, their instincts screaming a warning that she could not ignore. As they rested near the mine entrance, the air around them hung heavy with unease. The miners huddled together and whispered nervously among themselves, casting wary glances at the entrance. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them, and Lyra's heart raced with alarm. The miners looked at her, their eyes wide with fear, searching for reassurance. She felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the vibrations growing stronger, more insistent. At that moment, she knew the aberration had broken through her earthen seal. It was coming for them. The miners cried out in terror as a surge of unnatural darkness spilled forth from the mine's entrance, consuming the once peaceful clearing. In its wake, the aberration emerged, its tentacles writhing and coiling around its central body like a nightmarish mass. The aberration's presence seemed to suck the very light from the air, as the surrounding forest was swallowed by an impenetrable gloom. "Stand back," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. The miners, now fully aware of the danger they faced, scrambled to their feet, seeking cover behind the boulders and trees that dotted the clearing. With a roar of defiance, Lyra called upon the ancient power of her druidic lineage, her hands glowing with a brilliant, ethereal light. She hurled a torrent of searing energy at the aberration, the force of her attack driving it back towards the entrance of the mine. The creature howled in pain and fury, its tendrils thrashing wildly as it fought against the onslaught of Lyra's magic. Suddenly, the monster surged forward, its many tendrils whipping through the air as it lunged for Lyra. She barely had time to react, raising her arms in a desperate attempt to shield herself from the creature's deadly grasp. The tendrils wrapped around her, their barbs digging into her flesh as they began to constrict, squeezing the breath from her body. As Lyra struggled in the monster's grip, her vision darkening and her strength fading, the miners looked on in horror, powerless to help their friend and protect her. The creature emitted a chilling, guttural sound that echoed through the evening as it began to drag Lyra back towards the mine, her body limp and battered in its grasp, her face a mask of pain and determination. The miners, initially paralyzed by fear, found their courage reigniting in the face of Lyra's peril. With a battle cry, the grizzled miner charged forward, his pickaxe raised high, while a younger miner followed close behind, brandishing a heavy iron bar. As the two miners attacked the aberration, their weapons striking its hideous flesh with all the force they could muster, the creature bellowed in rage. Its grip on Lyra loosened for a moment, allowing her to catch a gasp of air and summon the last of her strength. Drawing upon the very essence of life that flowed through the earth beneath her feet, Lyra unleashed a desperate surge of druidic power. Vines erupted from the ground, entwining themselves around the creature's tendrils and pulling them away from her body. The pain was immense, the barbs tearing her flesh as they were wrenched free, but Lyra gritted her teeth and held fast, refusing to succumb to the darkness. The creature, now focused on the miners attacking it, continued to fight back, its tendrils whipping through the air as it sought to strike them down. But the miners, fueled by their determination to save Lyra and protect the mine, fought on, dodging and weaving as they continued to strike at its monstrous form. "Fall back!" Lyra shouted. In a desperate effort, Lyra's eyes blazed with emerald fury as she summoned the primal essence of fire. The spirits in the air sparked and ignited, unleashing a torrent of flame that consumed the aberration in a maelstrom of heat and light. The aberration retaliated with a blast of dark energy that dissipated her flames and forced Lyra to stumble backwards. She fell to the ground, her body racked with pain as she struggled to rise to her feet. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she could hear the shouts of the miners echoing through the forest. In the aftermath of the first onslaught, Lyra's breaths came in ragged gasps, her body battered and her resolve shaken. She watched as the aberration, still enshrouded in darkness, prepared for another attack. The chilling screams and cries of the miners rang out, their fear palpable in the air. Lyra knew she couldn't fail them. She had to find the strength to stand her ground and protect those who depended on her. But just as the shadows seemed to close in around them, a brilliant light pierced the darkness, illuminating the battlefield with a radiance that seemed to defy the very essence of the corruption that had tainted the mine. The air shimmered and rippled, and with a sound like the chiming of 1,000 silver bells, a figure stepped forth from the light. Her radiant form was a beacon of hope, her eyes shining with fierce determination. As she took in the scene before her, the miners fell to their knees in awe, their spirits lifted by the sudden appearance of their divine protector. "It's all right," Ebonheim called out, her voice like a warm embrace. "You've fought bravely. I'm here now, so leave the rest to me." 17. Chapter 12, Darkness at the Mines. Part 3. Ebonheim stood with her hands on her hips, trying to look confident and heroic as Lyra and the miners retreated behind her. "Hope it looked as awe-inspiring to them as it did when Hilda came and saved me." "You're welcome," she shouted after them while her legs trembled below. She stared, wide-eyed at the abomination in front of her. What madness of the forest is that? That monster looked absolutely terrifying. Her divine sight made it look even worse as she saw the malevolent aura radiating out from its body. Divine sight, rank I, active. Target, name, Cliffoth Remnant, type, dark, threat level, very difficult, Cliffoth. That name sounded dangerous and terrifying. Well, at least the Akashic system didn't say that it was an impossible threat to her. That gave her a little bit of comfort. But she had no idea how she was going to defeat it. Where did this thing come from anyways? In the mines? Why was something like that in there? Were there more inside? Hope not. Its very presence made her skin crawl, and at this point, she would have rather fought against a dozen Kungwans instead of this monstrosity. The aberration roiled towards her, faster than she thought was possible for its size. Uh-oh. She scampered away and headed towards the forest opposite to where her villagers fled to. "Okay," she said to herself. "You've got this. Just lure it into the forest, and then figure out what to do from there." She gulped and darted into the trees, hoping the creature would follow her. The aberration hissed and snarled, its countless tendrils thrashing about as it gave chase. Ebonheim raced deeper into the woods, nimble and agile, leaping from tree to tree. "Okay, so it's big and scary," Ebonheim muttered, clinging to a tree branch high above the ground. "But it's also slow and dumb, right? Maybe I can just keep my distance and take it down bit by bit." As she weighed her options, the aberration burst through the trees, its twisted form a nightmarish vision of writhing tendrils and unblinking eyes. The forest trembled under its approach. "Whoa, maybe it's not that slow." Taking a deep breath, she drew back her bowstring. Golden light coalesced into a radiant arrow. The arrow soared through the air, crackling with divine energy, and struck the vile creature square in its multitude of eyes. Attack hit, 40 divine damage to Cliffoth Remnant, damage doubled, 4 charges remaining. The aberration roared in pain and anger. Ebonheim raced away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Come on, you big, ugly beastie," she taunted as she leapt through the trees, her lithe body easily navigating the dense foliage. "Let's play a little game of cat and mouse." The aberration pursued her, its tendrils whipping and slicing through the trees in its path. She leapt between trees and fired off enchanted essence bolts whenever she could, trying to keep the monster at a distance. Attack missed, 3 charges remaining. Attack missed, 2 charges remaining. Attack hit, 40 divine damage to Cliffoth Remnant, damage doubled, 1 charge remaining. The aberration snarled and snapped at her, its tendrils reaching out for her like hungry snakes. "You dodged its attack." "Ha! Can't catch me," Ebonheim taunted, though her voice trembled slightly. She knew she needed a strategy to win, but her mind felt like it was spinning in circles. As she dodged another of its attacks, Ebonheim tried to think of a plan. She needed to use her powers to their full advantage, but she also needed to conserve her energy. Maybe if she could just wear the creature down, she could land a powerful hit to finish it off. "All right, you ugly blob," she muttered, "let's dance." Ebonheim sprinted through the forest, ducking under branches and leaping over roots as the aberration roared behind her. She fired off another enchanted essence bolt, and it struck the creature squarely in one of its many eyes. It howled in pain, but it didn't slow down. Attack hit, 44 divine damage to Cliffoth Remnant, damage doubled, 0 charges remaining. "Just gotta keep it up," she panted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Just a little more." She channeled her essence to activate her ability once again. 5 leaves comprised of ethereal golden light manifested behind her. Divine ability, enchanted essence bolt activated. Essence, 165, greater than 145. 5 charges remaining. "Hey, ugly," she yelled, taunting the aberration as she fired off another enchanted essence bolt, one of the leaves floating behind her vanishing. "You're not so tough, Are you? Bet you didn't think you'd be facing a goddess today, huh? Attack missed. 4 charges remaining. Crap. The creature screeched in response, and Ebonheim couldn't help but shudder. Okay, maybe that wasn't such a great idea, she thought. With each step, Ebonheim grew more and more afraid. The aberration was relentless, and it seemed like her attacks were barely making a dent. Even when her attacks landed, its amorphous flesh regenerated at a steady pace. Alright, think, she muttered to herself. That thing is big and scary, sure, but you're a goddess. You've got powers and stuff. It's just a matter of figuring out how to use them to take this thing down. She glanced back at the aberration, which was crashing through the trees in pursuit, tendrils flailing wildly. Easier said than done. As the scene of the battle shifted deeper into the forest, Ebonheim could see the aberration tearing through trees and uprooting plants in its rage. She knew she couldn't keep running forever, but the thought of confronting the creature head-on terrified her. Okay, she whispered to herself, time for a new plan. Just as the aberration was about to reach her, Ebonheim darted behind a large tree and activated her Vines of the Bramble King. Divine ability, Vines of the Bramble King, rank I, activated. Essence, 145, greater than 130. The vines shot out of the ground and wrapped around the creature's tendrils, holding it in place for a brief moment. Now's my chance, Ebonheim thought, launching another barrage of enchanted essence bolts at the aberration. Attack hit, 41 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 3 charges remaining. Attack hit, 40 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 2 charges remaining. Attack hit, 43 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 1 charge remaining. The aberration screeched in fury as Ebonheim's arrows found their mark. With a surge of power, the creature broke free from the vines, its tendrils lashing out with renewed vigor. Vine health, 25, greater than 0. Oh, come on. Why are my vines so weak? A blast of dark energy spewed from the aberration's central maw, hitting Ebonheim square on her stomach and sending her crashing to the ground. You've taken 35 necrotic damage. Health, 190, greater than 155. Ugh. She winced in pain as she got back up to her feet. The blast had eroded through the fabric of her dress and her flesh burned from beneath. The aberration surged forward, its tendrils lashing out at Ebonheim, whose back was against a tree. She channeled her essence without thinking. Arboreal stride activated. Essence, 130. Greater than 110. Before the tendrils could reach her, Ebonheim melded into the tree and emerged from another tree some distance away. She gritted her teeth and pulled back her bowstring, sending another enchanted essence bolt fly. A barrier of dark energy swirled around the aberration. The divine arrow hit the barrier and exploded in a burst of blinding light. The barrier quivered and lost some of its intensity. Attack absorbed, 26 divine damage to Umbral Shield. 0 charges remaining. Damn it, I have to deal with its shield now? She activated her Enchanted Essence Bolt again. Divine ability, Enchanted Essence Bolt activated. Essence, 110, greater than 90. 5 charges remaining. She shot another Essence Bolt at it, and again her attack was absorbed. Attack absorbed, 25 divine damage to Umbral Shield. 4 charges remaining. Ugh, seriously? Ebonheim huffed, frustrated by its new defense. With a determined glare, she knocked another arrow and fired it at the shield. The arrow seemed to vanish as it struck the barrier, but Ebonheim wasn't deterred. She continued to fire, hoping to find a weak spot or somehow overwhelm the shield. The forest echoed with the sounds of their battle, Ebonheim's arrows and the aberration's dark blasts creating a chaotic ballet of destruction throughout the forest. Trees were shredded by the creature's tendrils, and the ground was scorched by the dark energy. Ebonheim gritted her teeth, knowing that she needed to end this before the entire forest was laid to waste. She managed to break through its barrier after a few more direct hits. For a moment, it seemed like Ebonheim was gaining the upper hand. Her continuous attacks were forcing the aberration to focus on defense, and she was managing to stay out of its reach. She felt a spark of hope, thinking that maybe she could actually do this, but the aberration was nothing if not persistent. It continued to lash out with its tendrils and shoot dark blasts at Ebonheim, seemingly unfazed by the damage it was taking. Come on, just give up already, Ebonheim shouted in frustration. her anxiety mounting as Ebonheim continued to pepper the aberration with arrows. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if she couldn't defeat it? She shook off the doubts and steeled herself, focusing on the task at hand. Just keep shooting, she told herself, knocking another arrow. It has to come down eventually. The battle raged on, and Ebonheim decided it was time to step up her offense. She was tired of playing the defensive game, and she knew she needed to hit the aberration harder. "All right, you disgusting pile of sludge," Ebonheim muttered, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Let's see how you handle some friends of mine." With a flourish of her hands, she invoked the forest's call, animating 2 nearby trees to join the battle. Divine ability, Forest's Call activated. Essence, 70, greater than 55. The trees, now imbued with life and purpose, lumbered towards the aberration, their massive limbs swinging like clubs. "Go get 'em, boys," Ebonheim cheered, her fear momentarily forgotten in the thrill of the fight. "Show this monster what it means to mess with the goddess and her forest." The animated trees clashed with the aberration, their powerful blows shaking the very earth beneath them. Ebonheim took advantage of the distraction, using her agility to position herself for the perfect shot. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Just breathe, aim, and let it fly." Her enchanted bow hummed as she fired arrow after arrow, each one striking the creature with deadly precision. Attack hit, 44 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 1 charge remaining. The aberration roared in fury, its tendrils lashing out at the animated trees with brutal force. The trees groaned and splintered under the onslaught, but they refused to back down, fighting with a primal rage that matched the aberration's own. Ebonheim couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at their tenacity. "That's it," she shouted, her voice filled with fierce encouragement. "Don't let up. We've got this thing on the ropes." As it fought the animated trees, its body began to regenerate, the vile mass of putrescent tissue knitting itself back together with sickening speed. Ebonheim's heart sank as she realized that her attacks weren't causing enough lasting damage. "No, no, no," she cried, her frustration mounting. "This can't be happening." As the battle intensified, the forest became a chaotic whirlwind of flying leaves, splintering wood, and dark energy. The trees managed to land a few solid hits on the aberration, but the creature was relentless. With every passing moment, it seemed to grow more and more enraged, its attacks growing wilder and more destructive. Ebonheim watched the melee unfold, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever, but she had to find a way to bring the aberration down. Her fingers ached from drawing her bowstring, but she refused to give in to the pain. "Come on, you big oaf," she muttered, firing another arrow. "Just die already." Attack hit, 41 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 0 charges remaining. The aberration shrieked and redoubled its efforts, its tendrils tearing through the trees with renewed savagery. The animated trees, valiant to the end, finally succumbed to the onslaught, their broken forms crashing to the ground in a storm of splintered wood and crushed foliage. With the trees defeated, the aberration turned its full attention back to Ebonheim, its countless eyes glowing with an unholy rage. And she suddenly felt very, very small. "Uh-oh," she whispered, backing away from the rampaging monster. "This isn't good." 15. Chapter 13, Darkness at the Mines. Part 4. Lying on the forest floor, Ebonheim struggled to catch her breath. Her body bruised and battered from the relentless onslaught of the aberration. She knew she couldn't hold out much longer. She was on the verge of giving up when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Ebonheim." Lyra, the druid who had been with the miners when the aberration was unearthed, emerged from the trees flanking the aberration, her own injuries evident from the blood staining her clothing and the pained expression on her face. Despite her wounds, there was a determined glint in her eyes, and she limped toward Ebonheim with purpose. Ebonheim was shocked to see her. She had assumed Lyra had escaped with the others. "Lyra, you shouldn't be here," Ebonheim called out, her voice trembling with concern. "Go back with the others." "I can still fight," Lyra replied, her voice filled with determination. "We have to stop this thing. And you're not faring any better than I am right now." Ebonheim hesitated, torn between her worry for Lyra's safety and her desperation for help. But she knew Lyra was right. They had to stop this aberration, no matter the cost. Lyra uttered an incantation and Ebonheim watched in awe as the earth beneath the aberration's twisted form began to shift and tremble. Vines and roots surged from the ground, wrapping around the creature's legs and tendrils, binding them in place. The aberration roared in fury as it struggled against its restraints. "All right, keep it bound, Lyra," Ebonheim exclaimed, her heart swelling with hope. "Now it's my turn." With the aberration temporarily immobilized, Ebonheim knew she had the perfect opportunity to use her forest's call ability again. She closed her eyes, focusing her divine energy on the task at hand. Essence, 55, greater than 30. Two massive trees, their bark gnarled and ancient, suddenly uprooted themselves and began to lumber toward the aberration. Their limbs creaked and groaned as they moved, their branches stretching out like enormous arms. They towered over the creature, ready to strike at Ebonheim's command. With the aberration temporarily restrained by Lyra's vines and roots, Ebonheim's animated trees relentlessly attacked the monstrous creature, their powerful limbs striking it from every angle. Lyra, despite her injuries, focused on maintaining the vines that held the beast in place. Ebonheim, sensing the opportunity to strike, unleashed a barrage of enchanted essence bolts, each one finding its mark on the aberration's grotesque form. Lyra, her druidic powers surging, summoned gusts of wind to buffet the creature, and lightning crackled down from the sky, striking it with a deafening roar. But their victory was short-lived. The aberration suddenly unleashed a devastating burst of energy, shattering its restraints and sending the animated trees crashing to the ground. The force of the blast was so powerful that it knocked both Ebonheim and Lyra off their feet, leaving them sprawled on the forest floor, gasping for breath. As they struggled to rise, the aberration loomed over them, its myriad eyes twitching and darting in every direction. However, the animated trees were not finished yet. With a groan, the massive trees righted themselves and stood between the wounded warriors and the monstrous aberration. Their branches stretched out like enormous arms, entwining and grappling with the creature's tendrils. Lyra, still weakened from her injuries, was unable to evade the creature's attack. The aberration's tendrils shot forward, striking her with brutal force and sending her flying through the air. She slammed into a nearby tree, her body crumpling under the impact, and fell to the ground, unconscious. "Lyra!" Ebonheim cried, her voice cracking with despair. "Please, no." The aberration unleashed another devastating burst of energy. The sheer force of the blast sent the animated trees staggering backward, their bark scorched and splintered as they crashed into the ground. A barrage of tendril attacks cut through the prone giants until they stopped moving. With the trees destroyed, the aberration turned its attention back to Ebonheim. It advanced toward her, its tendrils writhing and undulating like monstrous serpents. "I can't do this." Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away. "I'm going to lose." The aberration seemed to sense her fear and pressed its advantage. It lashed out with its tendrils, cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Ebonheim managed to dodge most of the attacks, but she couldn't avoid them all. The tendrils slashed across her arms and legs, drawing lines of blood that dripped down onto the forest floor. "You've taken 30 necrotic damage. Health, 155, greater than 125. Oh," she cried, gritting her teeth against the pain. Her situation grew increasingly dire as the creature closed in on her. She knew she couldn't outrun it forever, and she was running out of energy. Her breathing was labored, her muscles aching from the strain of the battle. In a sudden burst of speed, the aberration lunged forward, its maw opening wide as it tried to finish her off. Ebonheim's eyes widened in terror, and she barely managed to leap through an oak tree and emerged from another nearby, her heart racing as she felt the creature's foul breath on her skin. "That was way too close," she gasped, stumbling away from the monster. "I can't keep doing this. I have to find a way to finish it off." The creature continued its relentless assault, and Ebonheim's body was battered and bruised, her energy dwindling. The tendrils struck her again and again, each hit feeling like a whip tearing into her flesh. She could feel the blood seeping through her white dress, staining it a deep, dark crimson. "You've taken 35 necrotic damage. Health, 125, greater than 90." She screamed in pain, clutching at her wound as warm blood seeped between her fingers. Another tendril lashed out, wrapping around her ankle and yanking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her as she struggled to free herself. You've taken 25 necrotic damage. Health, 90, greater than 65. As a particularly wicked tendril caught her across the chest, Ebonheim cried out in pain and fell to her knees. The impact of the hit forced the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping for breath. She clutched at the wound, her hands slick with her own blood. I can't do this, she panted, her vision starting to blur. It's too strong. In the heat of the battle, Ebonheim's desperation grew. The aberration's attacks grew fiercer. She tried to counter with her own attacks, but her fear and exhaustion had taken their toll. Her enchanted arrows flying wide of their mark. She knew she was running out of time and energy. Her body ached from the wounds she'd sustained, but she couldn't give up now. I have to find a way, she whispered, her voice ragged. I have to beat this thing. As she fired another arrow, Ebonheim's vision blurred, and she stumbled, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. She knew she didn't have much left in her, but she refused to go down without a fight. Attack hit, 44 divine damage to Cliffothic Remnant, damage doubled, 0 charges remaining. The aberration let out a glottal roar. As she dodged another tendril, she noticed that the aberration was beginning to show signs of weariness. Its once frenzied motions now sluggish and weak, its attacks less precise. Wait. It's working? Is it almost dead? Ebonheim realized that all of their previous attacks had taken their toll on the creature, and a spark of hope ignited in her chest. She gained some distance and turned towards the aberration, slowly roiling its way towards her. Essence, 30. She didn't have much essence left, and her enchanted essence bolts may not have enough power to completely eliminate it. Tempest of the Grove could slowly wear it down, but it didn't last long enough to be effective. She had one last power to try. This is it, she thought, desperation giving way to determination. I have to finish this now, or I'll never get another chance. You do not have the requisite essence to use divine ability. Blazing Essence Bolt. You are allowed to convert health into essence at a ratio of 3 to 1. Would you like to convert health into essence? Just do it. Conversion initiated. Health, 65, greater than 5. Essence, 30, greater than 50. Her knees bucked from under her as she felt her life force being drained. Okay, she panted, her voice barely more than a whisper. One last shot. Make it count. Drawing on her last reserves of strength, Ebonheim activated her Blazing Essence Bolt ability. Divine ability, Blazing Essence Bolt activated. As she raised her enchanted bow, her entire body shook with the effort. Pain seared through her veins like wildfire, and her vision swam before her eyes. But she forced herself to focus, to concentrate on the power building within her. The air around her grew heavy, charged with divine and fire energy. Her iridescent hair seemed to float and shimmer, as if it had a life of its own. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the wind whispered softly through the trees, as if the very forest was urging her on. The energy within her built to a fever pitch, threatening to overwhelm her. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm growing louder and faster, like the beat of a war drum. And then, with a cry of pure determination, she loosed the Blazing Essence Bolt from her bow. The arrow streaked through the air, leaving a blazing trail of divine and fire energy in its wake. Time seemed to slow down as the blazing projectile streaked through the air like a comet. The aberration's countless eyes locked onto the arrow, its tendrils reaching out in a futile attempt to deflect the attack. The Blazing Essence Bolt slammed into the aberration, the impact resonating through the forest like a thunderclap. It shrieked in agony as the divine and fire energy consumed it, its twisted form writhing and convulsing in the blazing inferno. The very air around it seemed to warp and distort, as if reality itself was being torn asunder by the force of the attack. Attack critical hit, conditional effect triggered, divine damage inflicted. Cliffothic Remnant destroyed. The Blazing Essence Bolt dissipated, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where the aberration had once stood. The forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a heavy fog. Exhausted and barely able to stand, Ebonheim lowered her bow and looked at the remnants of her foe. Gone. Finally, it was over. We did it, she whispered as she limped towards Lyra. After seeing Lyra's chest rise and fall, Ebonheim's legs finally gave out beneath her as she collapsed to the ground. We actually did it. She rested her arm over her eyes and quietly sobbed in relief. Lying on the forest floor, Ebonheim took in the aftermath of the battle. The trees were scarred and broken, the ground marred by the struggle. But the aberration was gone, its dark presence banished from her domain. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Ebonheim's injuries made themselves known, and she winced at the pain. She knew she needed to heal herself and tend to the forest, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of rest. "I'll fix this," she promised, staring up at the sky through the canopy of leaves. "I'll make it right. But first, just a little rest." With that, Ebonheim closed her eyes. The sounds of the recovering forest her lullaby as she drifted into a well-deserved sleep. Cliffoth Remnant destroyed. You've acquired 1000 quintessence. 18. Chapter 14. What lies beneath? A day had passed since the battle. Ebonheim's natural regeneration had completely healed her injury and replenished her essence. Lyra was still recuperating with the aid of another Jixishan druid that had arrived along with Bjorn and Thorson. Ebonheim had told them about her fight against the aberration. As she recounted the tale, they all listened intently. "I didn't even realize how strong I'd become until we faced off," said Ebonheim. "All the training I did really showed during the battle." She smiled as memories of the battle filled her mind. Her smile faded slightly, though, when she thought about what could happen if another aberration ever returned. As soon as Ebonheim finished recounting the events, Bjorn spoke. "Sounds like you fought quite a fearsome foe." "So, you were able to defeat this thing?" Thorson asked. "Yes, but barely," replied Ebonheim. "It took everything we had just to take it down." They looked at her with stern expressions, their arms crossed over their chests. Ebonheim blinked. "What? If you were having a hard time dealing with that monster, you should have just slowed it down and retreated," Thorson said. "There was no sense in fighting it by yourself when you haven't even been in a real battle." "Hey." She placed her hands on her hip and puffed her chest out. "I fought the Kungwans, remember?" "Aye, but you weren't by yourself back then, were ye?" Thorson puffed his chest out in response. "And you were about to be eaten had not been for Hilda's intervention." "Thorson, that's enough of the banter." Bjorn pat Ebonheim's head gently. "You did well." She smiled proudly, then gave Thorson a smug glance. Thorson shrugged and threw his hands up in defeat. "Aye, you won by the skin of your teeth, but the victory was yours. And well deserved." He walked over and patted her head as well. "You'll make a fine warrior yet. I'm your goddess, you know. I live off of praises and compliments, you know." "Ha! You'll get it from me when ye earn it. More importantly," Bjorn interrupted, "is finding out where that creature came from." "They said it came from inside the mine," Ebonheim said as she looked over at the miners. "Well, let's go ask them then," Thorson said. We made our way to the group resting in a small clearing. "Can you tell me exactly what happened before that thing appeared?" Ebonheim asked the group, her voice tinged with concern. The miners exchanged uneasy looks before one of them, a grizzled older man named Hulgraf, spoke up. "We were just doing our job, digging deeper into the mountain like we always do. Then, out of nowhere, this wall we were working on crumbled away, revealing a pitch-black void behind it. Before we knew it, that thing came crawling out of the darkness." Ebonheim listened intently, her brows furrowed in thought. "You couldn't see anything inside the void? No signs of where it might have come from?" The miner shook his head. "No, goddess. It was like the darkness itself swallowed everything up. We couldn't see a thing beyond that wall. I did not sense its presence until it was already upon us," Lyra added, leaning against a tree nearby. "Did you sense only that one?" Bjorn asked her. Lyra nodded her head. "I'm certain." Thorson stood by the entrance to the mine. "Well, it's been a day since then and nothing else appeared." "Still. It's strange," Ebonheim muttered softly under her breath. "Why would something like this appear here and now? Was there some sort of event that triggered its emergence?" "Maybe an earthquake," suggested Bjorn, but immediately shook his head. "No, otherwise we would have felt it at the village." "Or maybe someone summoned it," offered Thorson. Lyra shook her head. "I did not sense any magic before its appearance." Ebonheim pondered these ideas for a moment before shaking her head. "This doesn't feel right. This feels more like a coincidence than an actual event. But what could cause such an anomaly?" Thorson pressed. Ebonheim closed her eyes and focused on the situation. After a few moments, she opened her eyes again and turned to the group. "I need to investigate the mine. It's important we find out if there are any more threats lurking in there. In the meantime, None of you should enter the mine. Please, tell everyone in the village to avoid it until I give the all clear." "Oh no, you're not," Thorson said. "You're not going in there by yourself." "He's right," Bjorn added. "Too risky." "We'll go with you. It'll be safer that way." Did they really mean to babysit her like this just because they thought that something might happen to her in there? Did they really have so little faith in her even though she just bested something that could have probably bested them as well? Ebonheim stomped her foot on the ground in protest, and hurt her foot. She used the pain to fuel her anger. "I said I'll take care of this. None of you will enter until I give the all clear. I can escape danger any time I want, so your concern isn't needed. I'm the only one qualified to inspect the mine, so shush and just wait here." But Thorson was about to speak out, but she interrupted him. "No buts. This is my first divine decree." Bjorn and Thorson looked at one another, then shrugged in unison. "All right, lass," Bjorn said. "Get to it then. Just be careful, and at the first sign of danger, you come back here and we'll face it together." "Aye," she nodded. With that, she strode toward the mine. Ebonheim hesitated for a moment at the entrance of the mine, her heart pounding in her chest. "All right, let's do this," she muttered to herself, trying to sound brave and confident, even though her heart was racing. She took a deep breath, and then stepped into the mine, activating her divine sight to pierce the darkness that enveloped her. The world around her came alive with a soft, ethereal glow, revealing the rocky walls, the wooden supports, and the twisting tunnels that snaked off in different directions. "Wow, would you look at that?" she whispered to herself, her voice echoing through the tunnels. "I never knew the world could be so, well, so rocky." The rough-hewn walls of the tunnel sparkled with veins of precious minerals, and the air was cool and heavy with the scent of earth and stone. It was a whole new world to explore, and she couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. "I can't believe I've never been in here before," she said, her voice echoing softly through the tunnel. "This is amazing. Look at all the shiny stuff." She reached out to touch a vein of ore, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingers. "I wonder what this is? I should ask the miners when I see them again." Ebonheim continued down the tunnel, her anxiety temporarily forgotten. As she eagerly examined her surroundings, she ran her fingers along the walls, fascinated by the textures and colors of the rock, and stopped occasionally to pick up interesting-looking stones, turning them over in her hands and admiring the patterns carved into their surfaces. "Ooh, what's this?" she wondered aloud, stooping to examine a cluster of sparkling crystals embedded in the rock. "They're so pretty." She continued to wander deeper into the mine, her childlike curiosity driving her forward despite her fear. As she went, she talked to herself, her voice a constant, upbeat chatter that filled the silence around her. "Wow, this tunnel is so long. I wonder how far it goes. And look at all these tracks. I bet they use carts to move stuff around down here. Ooh, I'd love to ride one of those." Can you imagine just whizzing through the tunnels, like, wee? Lost in her exploration, Ebonheim almost forgot the reason she had come to the mine in the first place. But as she rounded a bend, the tunnel narrowed and she found herself facing a large crack in the wall. It was just wide enough for her to squeeze through, but the darkness beyond it seemed almost unnatural. She suddenly remembered the aberration and the danger it had posed. A shiver of fear ran down her spine, and she hesitated, wondering if she should turn back. But curiosity won out, as it always did. "Well, no turning back now," she murmured to herself, taking a deep breath and pushing herself through the crack. The instant she emerged on the other side, she knew she had stepped into a world unlike any she had ever seen before. The chamber before her was vast, its walls lined with strange, flickering lights that cast eerie shadows across the floor. "Whoa, what is this?" Ebonheim whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes darting around the room as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The chamber was filled with bizarre contraptions, their purpose utterly foreign to her. There were large, glass tubes filled with a strange, glowing liquid, and metal devices that hummed and whirred softly. Countless wires snaked across the floor, connecting the various pieces of equipment in an intricate web of interwoven cables. There were several smaller chambers branching off from the main chamber, each containing odd machines or mysterious tools. Some of these looked familiar to Ebonheim. She recognized gears, pulleys, levers, and springs among others. Ebonheim approached one of the machines, its surface covered in blinking lights and symbols she couldn't decipher. "I've never seen anything like this before," she said, reaching out a hand to touch the device. The moment her fingers brushed the smooth surface, a panel slid open, revealing even more cryptic symbols and buttons. Her heart skipped a beat and she jumped away, startled. Whoa! As she stared at the machine, her mind raced. What does this thing do? Is it dangerous? Should I try pressing some of the switches or moving a lever somewhere? She pressed one of the buttons at random, and the machine emitted a low hum before a soft, melodic tone filled the air. Did I just do something? She asked, half expecting the machine to explode. Instead, nothing happened except for the sound. She glanced nervously around the chamber once more, looking for signs of danger or hidden traps. Nothing seemed amiss, however, so she tentatively touched another button and heard the same soothing tone play. Then another, and still another, testing each switch and listening carefully to see if any of them produced the same effect. Each time, however, she received only the calming tune. At last, she gave up and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the machine, gazing at it intently while humming a tune under her breath. After a few moments spent contemplating the strange machinery around her, Ebonheim finally stood up and walked further into the chamber, examining the devices scattered throughout. After a brief search, she located a control panel and began tinkering with the various dials and switches. Instantly, the chamber came to life, the air filling with a cacophony of beeps, whirs, and hums as the machinery awoke from its slumber. The room was bathed in a kaleidoscope of colors as the strange devices began to function. "Uh-oh," Ebonheim muttered, her voice tinged with both awe and fear. "I've done it now." She watched as the machinery whirred and clicked, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to comprehend the spectacle unfolding before her. As she watched, she noticed a series of symbols etched into the base of a cylindrical structure glow. They were familiar, and yet not. It was as if they were a distorted reflection of the language she knew, a twisted mirror of the script she was used to reading. "All right, Ebonheim," she muttered to herself, "you faced down an aberration. You can handle this. Just take it one step at a time." And with that, she set to work, her mind racing as she began to unravel the enigma of the strange, otherworldly chamber. With each passing moment, Ebonheim delved deeper into the mysteries of the chamber, her curiosity and determination driving her forward. She moved from device to device, studying the strange symbols and attempting to decipher their meaning. The pulsing energy that suffused the walls and floor seemed to resonate with her own divine essence, filling her with a strange sense of familiarity. "This place. Why does this place feel kind of familiar?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. As she pondered that question, she found herself drawn to a large, circular panel set into the floor near the center of the chamber. The panel was adorned with an intricate pattern of glowing symbols, their shapes and forms echoing the design that she had seen on the walls. She approached the panel cautiously, her senses on high alert. As she neared the glowing symbols, she felt a surge of energy coursing through her body, as if the very air itself was alive with power. "What is this?" she gasped, staring at the swirling symbols before her. Her head swam slightly, and she staggered backwards until she bumped against the wall behind her. For a second, she feared she might faint, but then she shook her head vigorously, clearing her vision and forcing herself to focus. Okay, she said, breathing deeply and trying to regain her composure. She knelt down beside the panel, her fingers hovering just above the glowing symbols as she hesitated for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hands on the panel, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. The moment she made contact, a shock of energy coursed through her, her vision filling with a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. She felt as if she were being pulled into the very heart of the chamber, her consciousness merging with the pulsing energy that suffused the air. It wasn't painful, exactly. Instead, it was strangely exhilarating, like drinking fine wine, tasting exquisite cuisine, or enjoying a night out dancing. It left her feeling lightheaded and euphoric, but it was fleeting, leaving her drained and disoriented when it faded. When she opened her eyes again, she blinked several times, her mind struggling to process what had just transpired. That was weird. Slowly, she rose to her feet and turned toward the panel, studying the markings engraved onto its surface. Their meaning eluded her, but she could tell that they represented something important. As she studied the markings, she couldn't help but feel a growing frustration at her inability to understand any of it. It was like trying to read a book in a language she had never encountered before. "Ugh, why can't anything ever be easy?" she huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. As she wandered deeper into the chamber, she came across a large metal door, its surface smooth and unadorned. She placed her hand against the cool metal, wondering what secrets lay hidden beyond it. "All right, big mysterious door," she muttered, giving it a gentle push. To her surprise, the door remained stubbornly closed. She frowned, giving it a harder shove, but it still wouldn't budge. "Come on, open up," she cried, her frustration mounting as she pounded her fists against the door. "Why won't you just?" "Ugh." She slumped against the door, her energy spent. Desperate for answers, Ebonheim closed her eyes and reached out to the Akashic system, hoping it could provide some insight into the bizarre room she had discovered. "Akashic system," she whispered, "please help me figure out what all of this is." To her surprise, the Akashic system responded with a terse message: "Warning, access denied. Insufficient administrator privilege. Initiating security protocol." "Huh?" "Warning, access denied. Insufficient administrator privilege. Initiating security protocol." "Warning, access denied. Insufficient administrator privilege. Initiating security protocol." "Warning, access denied. Insufficient administrator privilege. Initiating security protocol." "Warning, access denied. In Iota Iota efficient administer Iota Iota Tor privilege. Init Iota Iating security Iota Y Pro Iota Tokol." Ebonheim's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. What does that even mean?" she muttered, her confusion mounting. Before she could ponder the message further, her vision blurred, and she felt an overwhelming wave of dizziness wash over her. "Ebonheim," spoke Thorson, "stop dilly-dallying already. We're waiting on you. Let's head back home." She found herself back outside the mine, the sounds of the miners' chatter reaching her ears as they started walking back toward the village. She blinked, her head spinning as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. "Are you all right, lass?" Bjorn asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Did I forget something?" she murmured, her brow furrowing in confusion. One of the miners turned to her with a friendly smile. "Good idea to stop mining at this spot, Ebonheim. We'll find another place to dig, don't you worry." Ebonheim hesitated, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. "Was it my idea?" The miner looked puzzled. "Of course it was, lass. You sealed it up yourself, remember? Just in case something else happens in there. Did a rock hit your head on your way out or something?" Thorson asked. She nodded slowly, her memories of the strange Iota amber beneath the mine already beginning to fade. "Right. I must have just forgotten." As they walked back to the village together, Ebonheim couldn't help but steal one last, lingering glance at the mine. Something about it called to her, a nagging sense of curiosity that refused to be silenced. But as they said, it was best to head home. The danger has passed. She was content with the safety of the miners. That was more important than one mine. They could always find another. 13. Chapter 15. An Eccentric Merchant, Part 1. 20th Day of Withergrasp, 1366. The merchant Roderick found himself weaving through the verdant expanse of the Eldergrove forest. He was on his way to Ebonheim, a remote village shrouded by the lush embrace of the ancient woods. His mode of transport was as awe-inspiring as it was unusual, a gargantuan mechanical spider, a fusion of magic and technology that stood as a testament to the ingenuity of the age. The mechanical arachnid was an imposing sight, its body the size of a small house, crafted from plates of shimmering metal adorned with delicate, swirling engravings. Its abdomen, a bulging capsule of reinforced steel, served as storage for Roderick's vast array of wares, while a plethora of cogs, gears, and arcane conduits hummed beneath its segmented exoskeleton. Atop the cephalothorax, Roderick occupied a plush leather seat, his hands expertly guiding the spider's movements with a series of levers and dials. The mechanical beast responded to his commands with fluid ease, its 8 legs working in perfect synchrony as it navigated the forest train. "Why must you insist on stopping by that village every time we journey through here?" asked Roderick's masked bodyguard, Simon. "It's a matter of faith," Roderick said with a shrug. "The villagers have never been unkind to me, and I find that their ways are very interesting. They've been displaced from their homes because of some trouble with a god or gods, and I find that very intriguing. I like to stop by once in a while and learn more about the situation." Simon sighed. "They're not your friends, Roderick, they don't want you around. Roderick scowled as he looked back at his bodyguard. They are my friends. They just don't know it yet. Simon snorted. Roderick, they're not your friends. They're your customers. Even then, you don't gain much profit from them. You only barter with trade goods since they don't use any currency. Trade goods are the backbone of any business. They have value, and I'm a merchant. What's wrong with trading with people? Nothing. But I'm sure most of them don't want you around. Roderick let out a hearty laugh and looked out at the forest. Bah. They've been nothing but friendly and cordial to me. I know at least a few that I'm on good terms with. But, for some of the more weary ones I suppose I can't blame them. Really, a merchant is a hard thing to trust. Simon leaned back against his seat. Hard, but necessary. I suppose you're right, Roderick agreed. As the mechanical spider made its way through the woods, it moved with a grace that belied its immense size. Its 8 articulated legs, powered by a combination of steam-driven pistons and intricate enchantments, stepped deftly over roots and rocks, leaving nary a trace of its passage. The sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, were accompanied by the soft hissing of steam and the gentle whir of gears. Roderick steered the giant arachnid with practiced precision, manipulating an array of levers and dials that responded to his touch with a satisfying click. Above him, an intricate web of copper piping fed steam and magical energy to the spider's limbs, the pipes occasionally releasing puffs of vapor that shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow. The very air surrounding the mechanical marvel seemed to crackle with arcane energy, a palpable reminder of the potent forces that coursed through its metallic veins. He had spent years tinkering with the arachnid's designs, and he was very pleased with its performance. It had taken him a great deal of effort to make it work properly, but the results had been worth the effort. Roderick eased his foot on the pedal to halt its forward motion. The spider's legs unfolded, the gait of its body returning to a crawl. He scanned the trees for signs of the markings the villagers had used to navigate through the woods and also served as a means to lead him to their village. "Help me look around for the markings," Roderick instructed his bodyguard. "I've a good memory but sometimes I can't quite recall where those markings are." Simon nodded and stood up from his seat. The two men quickly scanned the area, moving from tree to tree in search of a particular set of markings. "Here," Simon said, pointing at a small colored band laced with feathers tied to a branch. "Is that the marking you're looking for?" Roderick nodded. "Yes, that's the one. I remember now. These markings are quite distinctive." He pointed to a nearby tree trunk. "This was the first marking, and that one over there is the second. They're easy enough to spot once you know what to look for," Simon said. "I'll take care of finding the rest, while you go on ahead." Roderick nodded and took hold of a lever, adjusted it, and began cranking the legs of the giant mechanical spider into motion again. The spider lurched forward and resumed its trek through the elder grove. The dense foliage threatened to close in around the mechanical spider, but its enchanted limbs responded to Roderick's guidance, weaving effortlessly around trees and bushes as if they possessed a mind of their own. The few woodland creatures that crossed its path were at first startled by the spider's approach, but as they caught sight of the magical sigils etched into its metal hide, they seemed to sense the harmony of nature and magic that infused the contraption, and they resumed their activities undisturbed. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting its golden rays through the canopy above, Roderick caught his first glimpse of Ebonheim in the distance. A small clearing emerged from the trees and gave way to a collection of thatched houses and modest-sized stone buildings. A few people strolled the paths connecting the various homes, their children dressed warmly playing with wooden swords and shields. The villagers, hearing the approach of the mechanical spider, gathered at the edge of their settlement to welcome the merchant. "Roderick, welcome back to Ebonheim," said one of the villagers, his face beaming with delight. "Come in and rest your weary limbs." With a final hiss of steam and a soft whir of gears, the giant arachnid came to a halt at the outskirts of the village. Roderick descended from his perch, a broad smile gracing his weathered face as he greeted the villagers who had come to meet him. Simon followed suit, descending from the other seat. The villagers clustered around the mechanical spider, gazing upon its unusual construction and marveling at its peculiar nature. A few children poked at the spider's metal limbs, trying to find a way inside, but they failed to do so. They soon grew bored and returned to their games, though the adults remained fascinated with the mechanical marvel. "I brought you some trade goods," Roderick told them, and I'm willing to barter with anyone who's interested. I'll let the elders know, said one of the villagers. Almost didn't realize that it was that time of the year again. But here you are. A short while later, Engine approached Roderick with a big smile on his face and his arms outstretched for a hug. Roderick, Engine said. You're here. I'm so glad you came. And I am glad to be back, Roderick said as he hugged Engine. You've done well, my friend. Your village has grown so much since I last visited. Thank you, Engine replied with a smile. But you've done plenty for us too. Your wares have become invaluable to our village. I'm glad it helped, Roderick said. Do you need anything? We've been fine this year, but we would like to trade for more iron tools, Engine replied. I can supply you with plenty of those, Roderick said. I've been selling a lot of them lately and brought a sizable amount with me. Engine smiled and clapped his hands together. That's all I need to hear. Come then, let's speak with the others first, and we'll see what we can work out. Simon and Roderick followed Engine back to the center of the village as he led them to the feast hall. Roderick glanced at the shrine of their supposed goddess along the way. It was a simple structure, consisting of a small altar surrounded by several rocks, and adorned with a few colorful flowers. When Engine first told him of a deity adopting the village over a year ago, he was skeptical of the story. He couldn't imagine why any god would care to root themselves into governing a remote village, let alone a village that was only erected no more than a year prior. Any god would naturally flaunt their image and stature to visitors in their domain, but when he pressed to meet this goddess, Engine and the rest of the villagers were reluctant to show him any sign of their deity. Roderick had eventually given up on the idea and chalked it up to some inside joke, but he couldn't shake his sense of unease. They entered the feast hall and Engine took a seat at one of the tables, motioning for Roderick and Simon to take theirs. Roderick saw a few familiar faces already waiting for them inside. Bjorn and Thorsten were already seated at the table, looking as formidable as always with a flagon of ale in their hands. Roderick recognized the other two men at the table as well. Sven, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and beard who looked as though he was dressed for the fields, and Ionis, a younger man wearing heavy but practical clothing that matched his dark skin. Ionis, Sven, Thorsten, Bjorn, Roderick said with a smile. It's good to see you all again. And are you, Roderick? Ionis said in a thick accent. I'm glad you're here, Roderick, Thorsten barked. I've been waiting for your arrival. You did acquire what I asked you to last year. Aye, Roderick said as he sat down and poured himself a cup of ale. Thorsten's face immediately brightened and he beamed at Roderick, his arms reaching out to embrace him. I knew you would come through for us. Roderick accepted the hug and returned the smile. I'm glad to be back, he said. What brings you here this time? Sven asked. I brought a shipment of iron tools, Roderick said, as well as a few more wares that this village might fancy. Sven's eyes lit up. Good. We could use more tools than we have now. The last batch you traded wasn't as plentiful as it should have been. Roderick smiled at Sven. Of course, Sven. I'll bring you as many of them as you need. I'm glad to hear it, Sven said. As the five of them chatted, the main door of the feast hall slammed open. A young girl rushed to their table and vaulted over Roderick in a blur of white, silken dress and iridescent hair. He noticed Simon reaching for the large sword strapped to his back. The girl landed atop the table and marched towards Engine without breaking stride. Engine, the girl bellowed. Did you see that huge iron spider outside? What is that? It's not moving and I tried poking at it but it didn't react. Where did it come from? Do you think there are more of them out there? Should I be worried? Roderick chuckled as the girl barraged Engine with question after question. Simon's hand, which was wrapped around his sword, began to relax as the girl continued speaking without pause. Calm down, Engine finally interrupted, rubbing his temples. That thing that you saw is no creature. It is a vehicle, much like a wagon. The girl didn't seem convinced. That? A wagon? Are you drunk already? Thorsten burst out in laughter. That's what we call a mechanical spider. Bjorn spoke, holding up his ale glass. It's the latest marvel in travel. Mechanical spiders? The girl said, her gold eyes wide as she turned to look at Bjorn. Wait, gold? Roderick blinked and rubbed his eyes. Yes. The girl's irises were certainly gold in color. Not only that, her long iridescent hair was even more unusual. It seemed to be composed of fine strands of silver that seemed to shimmer in the light, almost as if they were reflecting the colors around them. End of Block 1.